Hello everyone. Welcome to Midnight Story Channel. I'm here to help you today. I know many of you listen to these stories to help you drift off to sleep, and I'm honored to be part of your journey. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching now? Take a deep breath, get comfortable, and allow yourself to relax. Your story is about to begin. Story 1. The neon vacancy sign sputtered like a dying ember, painting the cracked asphalt of the motel parking lot in an ominous red glow. I should have pressed on, should have heeded that nagging intuition, but exhaustion blurred my judgment. The thought of another hour behind the wheel, with two restless children in the back, made the shabby desert sands appear like a mirage in the arid night. I steered our old SUV into a spot near the office, its headlights revealing peeling paint and boarded-up windows. Just for the night, I murmured to my wife, Lena, as much for my own reassurance as hers. She merely nodded, her eyes heavy with fatigue. The bell above the office door shrieked a discordant welcome as I pushed it open. The air inside was heavy and stale, like forgotten tomes in a damp crypt. Behind the counter stood a man who seemed as dilapidated as the motel itself, hollowed cheeks, teeth stained yellow, and eyes that wouldn't quite meet mine. "Need a room," I managed, feigning a confidence I didn't possess. The clerk's gaze drifted past my shoulder, as if scrutinizing something, or someone, behind me. I turned, but only the empty parking lot was visible through the grimy window. "Just you?" he rasped, his voice dry as desert dust. "No, my wife and two kids are in the car." A slow, unsettling grin spread across his face. "Family vacation, eh? How delightful." He reached for a key on the pegboard, his movements jerky and unnatural. "Room 13. End of the row. Nice and quiet." As I paid in cash, the credit card machine was conveniently broken. I couldn't shake the sensation that he was studying me, etching every detail into his memory. His gaze never wavered as I backed out of the office, the key clutched tightly in my hand. Lena was already pulling bags from the SUV when I returned. "Everything all right?" she asked, noticing my unsettled expression. I forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired." "Let's get settled." We roused the kids, their sleepy grumbles blending with the chorus of crickets and the distant drone of highway traffic. As we tramped towards our room, I couldn't help but notice the eerie emptiness of the parking lot. In the flickering neon, I counted only two other vehicles. Room 13 reeked of stale cigarettes and cheap hair freshener. The wallpaper, a faded floral print, peeled at the seams. Two queen beds, their worn comforters relics from a bygone era, dominated this small space. "It's just for one night," Lena said, echoing my earlier reassurance. She began unpacking essentials for the morning while I settled the children. It was almost midnight by the time we finally crawled into bed. Lena fell asleep almost instantly, her soft breaths a gentle counterpoint to the rattling air conditioner. I lay awake, gazing at the water stains on the ceiling, unable to shake the disquiet that had settled over me like a suffocating shroud. A sound from outside pierced the stillness, footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. I slipped from the bed and moved to the window, careful not to disturb Lena. Peering through a gap in the dusty curtains, I scanned the parking lot. At first, nothing. Then, a flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure stood in the deepest shadows near the ice machine, almost swallowed by the dim light. It was a man, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing dark clothing that seemed to melt into the night. He was staring directly at our room. I blinked, convinced it was a trick of the light, but when I looked again, he was still there, utterly motionless. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I desperately wanted to believe it was just another guest, perhaps stepping out for a late-night smoke, but something about his posture, the unsettling intensity with which he watched our room, screamed danger. I considered waking Lena, but decided against it. No need to alarm her if it proved to be nothing. Instead, I kept vigil, my heart thudding so loudly I was sure it would wake the kids. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only minutes, the figure moved. He took a step, then another, emerging from the shadows into the sickly glow of the parking lot lights. I could see him more clearly now, a face partially obscured by a baseball cap, hands buried deep in the pockets of a dark jacket. He walked with grim purpose, heading straight for our room. My throat went dry, and the icy grip of panic squeezed my chest. This was not normal. This was not right. I rushed to Lena, shaking her gently but urgently. "Lena," I whispered, my voice tight with fear. "Lena, wake up. We need to go." She stirred, confusion clouding her face. "What? What's wrong?" "There's someone outside," I said, already moving to grab our things. "Someone watching our room. We need to leave, now." To her credit, Lena didn't question me. She saw the terror in my eyes and sprang into action, waking the children while I haphazardly stuffed our belongings into bags. A heavy, insistent knock on the door froze us in place. Not the polite tap of hotel staff. "Who is it?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer, just another knock, louder this time. Lena huddled with the kids, their eyes wide with fear. I motioned for them to be quiet and stay back. Heart hammering, I approached the door. Through the peephole, I could see the man from the parking lot. He was looking down, his face still hidden by the cap. "What do you want?" I demanded, my hand resting on the door chain. He looked up, then directly into the peephole. His eyes were dark, intense, filled with an emotion I couldn't quite decipher, not anger, exactly, but something else, something hungry. "Open the door," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "We need to talk." "About what?" I asked, buying time. Lena continued to gather our things as quietly as possible. "You shouldn't be here," he replied. "This isn't a safe place for families." A shiver ran through me. Was this a threat, or a warning? "We're leaving," I said. "Just give us a few minutes to pack up." "No," he said, urgency seeping into his voice. "You need to leave now. Right now." The door handle rattled. Lena stifled a gasp, clutching the kids closer. I made a split-second decision. "Okay." I called out. "We're coming out. Just give us space, all right?" I turned to Lena and mouthed "back door." She nodded, understanding instantly. Thankfully, like many old motels, this room had a rear exit. As I kept talking to the man through the front door, Lena ushered the kids towards the back, bags in hand. "We're just getting dressed," I said loudly, masking the sound of the back door opening. "We'll be right out." As soon as Lena gave me the nod that they were clear, I made my move. I yanked the front door open, startling the man on the other side. Without hesitation, I shoved past him, sprinting towards the back of the motel. I could hear him shouting behind me, his heavy footsteps giving chase, but fear lent speed to my legs, and I quickly caught up with Lena and the kids. "The car!" I gasped, fumbling for the keys. We piled in, the engine roaring to life just as the man rounded the corner of the building. In the rearview mirror, I could see others emerging from the shadows, the clerk, and guests I hadn't seen before, all moving with that same purposeful, predatory gait. I floored it, tires screeching as we peeled out of the parking lot. In the rearview mirror, I watched as the figures grew smaller, standing in the road behind us like silent sentinels. We drove for hours, putting as much distance between us and the desert sands in as possible. When the sun finally rose, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, we pulled into a bustling truck stop. Over steaming cups of coffee, Lena and I tried to make sense of what had happened. Were they criminals? A cult? Or just some sick game played on unsuspecting travelers? We never found out. A quick internet search revealed nothing about the desert sands and no reviews, no listings, not even an address. It was as if it had never existed. As we pulled back onto the highway, continuing our journey, I couldn't shake the image of those figures standing in the road, watching us drive away. I'd always thought of horror as something supernatural, ghosts, monsters, things that go bump in the night. But now I knew better. True horror wore a human face. It lurked in run-down motels on lonely highways, waiting for unsuspecting families to stumble into its web. We drove on, the desert stretching endlessly before us, but every time I saw a neon vacancy sign flickering in the distance, I pressed the accelerator a little harder, the memory of that night urging me to keep moving, to stay in the light, to never again trust the false promise of refuge in the darkness. Story 2. The dusty tome fell open with a sickening crack, releasing a cloud of ancient particles that danced in the dim light of the library's hidden alcove. As the dust settled, my eyes locked onto a page of cramped, spidery writing. The words seemed to ride on the yellowed paper, and a chill ran down my spine as I read the first line. On this day, a darkness will descend upon our town, born from the depths of man's own wickedness. The date scrolled at the top of the page was tomorrow's date, 150 years in the future from when the book was written. I'm Eleanor Vance, and I've been the head archivist at Oak Haven Public Library for over a decade. I thought I knew every nook and cranny of this old building, every scroll in its collection, but I was wrong. So very wrong. It started on a Tuesday, one of those dreary autumn days when the sky hangs low and heavy, threatening rain that never quite falls. I was reorganizing the local history section, a task I'd been putting off for months. The library was quiet, just the occasional rustle of parchment or muffled cough from the few patrons scattered about. As I shifted a particularly heavy shelf, my hand brushed against something behind it. Curious, I peered into the gap and saw the edge of what looked like a curtain. My heart quickened as I pulled the shelf further out, revealing a hidden alcove I'd never known existed. The space was small, barely big enough for a person to stand in, but it was the contents that made my breath catch in my throat. Shelves lined the walls, packed with books unlike any I'd seen before. Their spines were unmarked, bound in cracked leather that seemed to absorb the light. I reached for the nearest one, my fingers trembling slightly as I pulled it from the shelf. That's when I found the first prediction, the one about darkness descending on our town. I told myself it was just a coincidence, a vague prophecy that could apply to anything. But as I flipped through more pages, My disbelief turned to horror. The book detailed events in Oak Haven's history with uncanny accuracy: fires, floods, scandals that had rocked our small community. But it didn't stop at the present. It continued on, describing future events with the same matter-of-fact tone. I spent hours in that alcove, poring over the books, my mind reeling with each new revelation. By the time I emerged, the library was closed, darkness pressing against the windows. I locked up mechanically, my thoughts still trapped in that hidden room. That night, I barely slept. The words from the book swirled in my head, prophecies of doom mingling with mundane predictions about weather and local elections. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that it was all an elaborate hoax. But deep down, a part of me knew these books held power, knowledge that no one should possess. The next morning, I arrived at the library early, determined to make sense of what I'd discovered. As I unlocked the front door, a gust of wind nearly knocked me off my feet. Dark clouds roiled overhead, just as the book had predicted. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather ran through me. Throughout the day, I found myself checking the news obsessively, waiting for the darkness the book had mentioned. But nothing out of the ordinary happened. People came and went from the library, oblivious to the turmoil in my mind. It wasn't until I was closing up that night that it happened. As I was ushering the last few patrons out, a commotion erupted outside. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. Through the library's large front windows, I saw people running down the street, panic etched on their faces. My heart pounding, I stepped outside. The air was thick with smoke, and in the distance, I could see an orange glow lighting up the sky. Fire. A big one, by the looks of it. Someone shouted as they ran past. It's the old foundry. The whole thing's gone up. The old foundry. My blood ran cold as I remembered another passage from the book. The forgotten bones of our town's industry shall be cleansed by fire, revealing secrets long buried. I stood there, frozen, as chaos erupted around me. People were evacuating nearby buildings, fire trucks screamed past, and all I could think about were those books, hidden away in the library, books that had known this was coming. In the days that followed, the fire at the foundry was all anyone could talk about. As the book had predicted, the blaze revealed things long hidden, evidence of toxic waste dumping that had occurred decades ago. The scandal rocked our small town, leading to arrests and a flurry of legal action. I kept silent about the books, watching in growing horror as prediction after prediction came true. Small things at first: a surprise win in the mayoral race, an unusually harsh winter. But as time went on, the events grew more significant, more ominous. I became obsessed, spending every free moment in that hidden alcove, trying to decipher the cryptic writings. I started keeping a journal, documenting each fulfilled prophecy. My friends noticed the change in me, the dark circles under my eyes, the way I jumped at every unexpected noise. But how could I explain? Who would believe me? Months passed, and the weight of knowledge pressed down on me like a physical thing. I found myself looking at my neighbors differently, wondering if they were mentioned in the book's dark future. Would they be victims? Perpetrators? The lines began to blur. Then came the day I read about my own death. It was hidden in a passage about a guardian of knowledge, who would now pay the ultimate price for her curiosity. The date listed was just 2 weeks away. I felt the world tilt around me, the words swimming on the page as panic clawed at my throat. That night, As I lay awake in bed, a terrible thought occurred to me. What if the books weren't just predicting the future? What if they were shaping it? The idea took root, growing like a poisonous vine in my mind. I thought of all the tragedies I'd read about, all the suffering to come, and I knew what I had to do. The next night, I broke into the library. The hidden alcove seemed to be waiting for me, the air inside thick and expectant. I pulled the books from the shelves, piling them in the center of the room. My hand shook as I poured accelerant over them, the fumes making my eyes water. I hesitated, lighter in hand. Was I really going to do this? Destroy centuries of knowledge? But then I thought of the fire at the foundry, of all the other predictions yet to come true, of my own impending doom. With a flick of my thumb, I lit the lighter and tossed it onto the pile. The flames caught quickly, hungrily devouring the ancient pages. I watched, mesmerized, as the books curled and blackened. Smoke filled the small space, acrid and thick. I knew I should leave, but I couldn't tear myself away. These books had consumed my life for months. It felt fitting that I should see their end. As the fire grew, I began to feel lightheaded. The smoke was too thick, the heat too intense. I turned to leave, but found myself disoriented. Which way was the exit? The flames were everywhere now, dancing at the edges of my vision. I stumbled, coughing, my lungs burning. In that moment, as consciousness began to slip away, a terrible clarity came over me. The books had predicted this too. The guardian of knowledge paying the ultimate price in trying to change the future. I had fulfilled it. As darkness closed in, my last thought was of the library, of all the stories held within its walls, stories of hope, of love, of human perseverance. And I realized too late, that in my fear of the dark predictions, I had forgotten about all the light that existed alongside them. They found my body the next morning amidst the charred remains of the hidden alcove. The fire had been contained, thanks to the library sprinkler system, but the books and their terrible secrets were gone. In the aftermath, as the town mourned and speculated, no one knew the full truth of what had happened that night. No one knew about the books that had predicted it all. And perhaps that was for the best. Some knowledge, I learned too late, is too dangerous to possess. But sometimes, in the quiet corners of the rebuilt library, patrons swear they can smell smoke, can hear the whisper of pages turning when no one's there. And in those moments, I wonder, did I really destroy all the books? Or are there more out there, waiting to be discovered, waiting to reveal the dark futures yet to come? Story 3. The first scream tore through the wilderness like a jagged knife, echoing off the ancient, towering trees and sending a flock of startled ravens scattering into the darkening sky. I froze mid-stride, my hiking boot hovering above a gnarled root, as the sound faded into an eerie silence. For a moment, I tried to rationalize it away, just an animal, a bobcat or a lone wolf. But deep down, a cold certainty solidified. That scream was human, and it was saturated with pure terror. I'm Alex Vance, and I've been trekking solo through national parks for years. It's my sanctuary, my way of reconnecting with the raw power of nature and disconnecting from the relentless hum of everyday life. This journey into Redwood National Park was meant to be no different, just me, my weathered pack, and miles of colossal, ancient trees. But as I stood there, heart thrumming against my ribs, I realized this peaceful solitude was about to twist into something far more sinister. The logical choice would have been to turn back, to retrace my steps to the main trail and alert the park rangers. Yet, a powerful, inexplicable curiosity, or perhaps something darker, propelled me forward. I veered off the marked path, pushing through dense underbrush, drawn by an urge I couldn't comprehend. As I pressed deeper into the forest, the light rapidly diminished. The colossal redwoods, ancient sentinels reaching for the heavens, blocked out the setting sun, creating a perpetual twilight world of shifting shadows and whispers. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and unfamiliar. I have no idea how long I walked. Time seemed to warp and stretch in the oppressive depths of that primeval forest. Suddenly, I emerged into a small clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. In the center stood a crude altar, grotesquely fashioned from twisted branches and adorned with objects that churned my stomach: bones, feathers, and other things I couldn't, or didn't want to, identify. Around the altar, a group of figures moved in a slow, unsettling, rhythmic dance. They wore dark robes that seemed to absorb the little light that filtered through the dense canopy. Their faces were completely obscured by deep hoods. Yet, I could clearly hear their low, guttural chanting, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within the earth. I dropped to my knees behind a fallen log, my heart hammering so loudly against my ribs I was certain they would hear it. This was profoundly wrong. I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but of course, there was no signal. I was miles from any semblance of civilization, witnessing a scene that should only exist within the pages of a macabre novel. As my eyes adjusted to the deepening gloom, I noticed a figure lying on the altar. My blood ran cold as I realized it was a person, alive, but bound and struggling weakly against their restraints. The chanting grew louder, more frenzied, and then, one of the robed figures stepped forward, raising a curved blade that glinted dully in the fading light. I knew, with a sickening certainty, that I had to do something. I couldn't simply watch this horror unfold. But what could one lone hiker possibly do against a group of knife-wielding zealots? As I wrestled with my conscience, a small twig snapped loudly under my foot. The sound was deafening, like a gunshot in the unnatural quiet of the clearing. The chanting ceased abruptly. As one, the robed figures turned towards my hiding place. I held my breath, pressing myself flat against the damp earth, praying they hadn't seen me. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing moved. Then, a voice, raspy and cold, shattered the silence. "We have an uninvited guest, brothers and sisters. How fortunate. The old ones always provide." A jolt of pure terror shot through me. I scrambled to my feet, all thoughts of stealth obliterated, and plunged back into the dense embrace of the forest. Behind me, I could hear shouts and the crashing of undergrowth as the cultists gave chase. I ran blindly, branches whipping at my face, roots snaking up from the earth, threatening to trip me with every desperate stride. The forest, which had felt so peaceful just hours ago, was now a labyrinth of oppressive shadows and insidious dangers. Every tree looked identical, every twisted path seemed to lead deeper into the suffocating darkness. The voices behind me grew unnervingly closer. They knew these woods, I realized with growing dread. This was their domain, and I was merely a lost, stumbling intruder. A thorny branch caught my backpack, yanking me violently off balance. I shrugged out of the straps, abandoning my supplies without a second thought. Better to lose my gear than my life. As I ran, my mind raced through desperate options. Did I have any chance of outrunning them until I reached the main trail? Could I find a hidden spot and simply wait them out? Or was I just delaying the inevitable? A flicker of distant light through the trees caught my eye. Fire. For a fleeting moment, hope surged through me. Campers, perhaps, or even park rangers. But as I desperately changed course towards the light, a horrifying realization dawned. I had somehow run in a full circle, ending up back near the clearing with the altar. I skidded to a halt at the very edge of the firelight. The cultists had returned to their ceremony, but now they moved with a frantic urgency that sent fresh chills down my spine. The figure on the altar was thrashing wildly, their muffled screams barely audible over the increasingly frenzied chanting. I knew I should run, should seize this chance to put as much distance as humanly possible between myself and this nightmare. But the thought of leaving that person to die gnawed at me, a visceral ache in my gut. I had to do something, even if it was foolish and reckless. Looking around desperately, my eyes landed on a hefty branch lying nearby. It wasn't much of a weapon, but it was better than nothing. Taking a deep, ragged breath, I grabbed the branch and charged into the clearing, screaming at the top of my lungs. The element of surprise worked in my favor. The cultists scattered momentarily, stunned by my sudden, wild appearance. I raced to the altar, my makeshift club swinging wildly. I managed to connect with one robed figure, sending them sprawling into the dirt. I reached the altar and began tugging frantically at the ropes binding the victim. Up close, I could see it was a young woman, her eyes wide with a horrifying blend of terror and confusion. "I'm going to get you out of here," I gasped, my fingers fumbling desperately with the complex knots. But my advantage was short-lived. A hand clamped onto my shoulder, spinning me around violently. I found myself face to face with one of the cultists, his hood now thrown back to reveal a face contorted with pure, unbridled rage. "Fool!" he snarled, his voice guttural. "You cannot stop what has been set in motion." I swung my branch, but he caught it with terrifying ease, wrenching it from my grasp. As he raised it to strike, a piercing whistle ripped through the air. The cultist froze, his head snapping towards the sound. "This is the park service. Everyone, stay where you are." Relief, so intense it made my knees weak, flooded through me as powerful flashlight beams cut through the suffocating darkness. Park rangers poured into the clearing, their shouts filling the air. The cultists, their ritual shattered, broke ranks, fleeing frantically into the woods. But the rangers were prepared. I watched in a daze as several figures were tackled and quickly handcuffed. A ranger approached me, concern etched deeply on her face. "Are you all right, sir? Are you injured?" I shook my head, still struggling to process the impossible events that had just unfolded. "I'm okay," I managed, my voice hoarse. "But she needs help." I gestured weakly to the woman on the altar. As the ranger moved to free her, I sank to the damp ground, my legs finally giving out beneath me. The next few hours passed in a surreal blur as I gave my statement to the rangers and local police, trying desperately to describe what I'd witnessed without sounding utterly insane. They assured me that they'd been tracking this particular cult for weeks, following unsettling reports of missing hikers and strange sightings deep within the park. As dawn broke, casting a pale, ethereal light over the clearing, I sat wrapped in a shock blanket, watching as forensics teams meticulously combed the area. The crude altar and other disturbing evidence were photographed and carefully removed, bagged and tagged. It all seemed profoundly surreal, like a terrible dream I couldn't quite shake off. The young woman I'd tried so desperately to save was taken to a hospital. Before leaving, she gripped my hand tightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice raw and fragile. "If you hadn't come." She trailed off, her eyes filling with unshed tears. I simply nodded, unable to find any adequate words. In the days and weeks that followed, I gave more statements, attended identification lineups, and slowly tried to piece my shattered life back together. The story made national headlines: "Hiker uncovers deadly cult in National Park." But the sensational headlines couldn't possibly capture the raw terror of that night, the primal fear that still jolted me awake in the dead of night. I've been asked if I'll ever go hiking again, if I've sworn off solo trips into the wilderness. The truth is, I don't know. The forest that once felt like a sacred sanctuary now holds shadows I can't unsee. But there's a stubborn part of me that refuses to let them win, to let them taint the natural world with their insidious darkness. Sometimes, when the intrusive memories threaten to overwhelm me, I think of that young woman. I think of how agonizingly close she came to becoming just another missing hiker, another cold, unsolved mystery. And I realize that as much as I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, I was also exactly where I needed to be. The cult members who were caught are now facing trial. Some are cooperating with authorities, slowly revealing the full, chilling extent of their depraved activities. But others remain stubbornly silent, their eyes holding dark secrets that make me shudder just to contemplate. I know there are more out there, more hidden altars, more dark ceremonies taking place in the forgotten shadows of our wilderness. And sometimes, in my darkest moments, I wonder if I'll ever truly escape that night in the forest, if a part of me will always be there, running endlessly through the trees, pursued by hooded figures and the chilling echoes of inhuman chants. But then I look out my window at the trees swaying gently in the breeze, at the birds soaring effortlessly overhead, and I remember why I fell in love with nature in the first place. It's vast and wild, and yes, sometimes terrifyingly dangerous, but it's also profoundly beautiful and vital, and utterly worth protecting. So maybe, just maybe, I'll lace up my hiking boots again someday. But next time, I think I'll stick strictly to the marked trails. Some parts of the wilderness, I've learned, are simply better left unexplored. Story 4. The shriek of the ambulance siren dissolved into the howling wind as I wrestled my rig through the icy, treacherous roads, my knuckles white against the steering wheel. The address blazing on my GPS was Alien, a lonely, flickering dot on the far outskirts of the town of Havenwood. As the snow swirled hypnotically in my headlights, obscuring the world beyond, a profound chill snaked down my spine, one that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperatures. Something about this call felt different. Wrong. I'm Jake Miller, paramedic for Havenwood Emergency Services. 10 years on the job, and I'd convinced myself I'd witnessed every imaginable permutation of human suffering and crisis. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the chilling tableau that awaited me on that frigid winter night. The blizzard had been raging for hours, transforming our quaint, sleepy town into a ghostly, monochromatic landscape of white. Most sensible folk were hunkered down in their homes, patiently waiting out the fury of the storm. But duty, that relentless, unforgiving master, had called. When the emergency alert crackled through, detailing a possible cardiac arrest at a remote address, my partner, Charlie, and I had simply loaded up the ambulance and plunged headlong into the heart of the maelstrom. As we left the familiar, comforting glow of the town streets behind, the world seemed to close in around us. The twin beams of our headlights barely managed to penetrate the impenetrable wall of white, and the wind, a banshee's mournful wail, buffeted the ambulance, threatening to shun us off the narrow, winding road. Charlie, usually a fountain of incessant chatter, had fallen into an uncharacteristic silence, his eyes fixed with unnerving intensity on the GPS screen, as if willing it to guide us safely to our cryptic destination. "This can't be right," I muttered, the words barely audible above the storm's fury, as we turned onto what was little more than a dirt track, now buried under treacherous inches of snow. "Who lives all the way out here?" Charlie merely shrugged, his face a pale, ghostly mask in the dashboard's dim glow. "Dispatcher said it was an old man. Probably some hermit who values his privacy." I nodded, but the gnawing unease in my gut only intensified. We were miles from the nearest neighbor, from any conceivable help if things were to veer south. Yet, there was no turning back now. Someone, somewhere, needed us. And it was our solemn duty to be there. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a handful of minutes, a structure loomed out of the swirling darkness. It was a house, if one could even dignify it with such a term, more akin to a ramshackle, skeletal cabin that appeared poised to buckle and collapse under the immense weight of the snow burdening its roof. A solitary, anemic light flickered erratically in a downstairs window, the only fragile sign of life in this desolate, frozen wilderness. I parked the ambulance as close to the front door as I dared, a profound aversion to getting hopelessly stuck in the deepening drifts guiding my hand. As Charlie and I grappled with our gear and stepped out into the malevolent, howling wind, the cold hit me with the force of a physical blow, stealing what little breath remained in my lungs. The snow was nearly up to my knees, and each agonizing step was a monumental struggle, a Sisyphean effort against the elements. As we struggled towards the porch, the decrepit wood creaked ominously beneath our weight, a mournful lament in the stillness. I raised a gloved hand to knock, but before my knuckles could even make contact, the door swung open with a slow, drawn-out groan that seemed to echo eerily in the preternatural quiet. An old man stood silhouetted in the opening, hunched and frail, his roomy, vacant eyes peering up at me from a face deeply etched with countless lines, like a forgotten cartographer's map. "Took you long enough," he grumbled, his voice a dry, papery rasp barely audible over the wind's ceaseless moan. Come in. He's upstairs." Charlie and I exchanged a quick, unsettled glance. "Sir," I said, raising my voice to be heard above the gale. "We received a call about a possible heart attack. Are you all right?" The old man waved a gnarled hand dismissively. "Not me, you fool. My brother. He's the one who needs help. Hurry up now, he doesn't have much time." Alarm bells, shrill and insistent, began to clang in the back of my mind, but I ruthlessly pushed them aside. We had a job to do, a life potentially hanging in the balance. I nodded to Charlie, and we followed the old man into the suffocating gloom of the house, dragging our heavy equipment behind us. The interior was dimly lit, a suffocating labyrinth of clutter. Every conceivable surface was burdened with precarious stacks of yellowed newspapers, ancient, moldering books, and a bewildering array of unidentified items that seemed to ride and shift in the oppressive gloom. The air was thick, heavy with the cloying, musty smell of generations of neglect, and something else, something metallic and profoundly unsettling. "Up here," the old man rasped, already halfway up a narrow, winding staircase that seemed to groan in protest with every step. We followed, our boots leaving wet, muddy prints on the worn, faded treads. The upper floor was even darker than the first, the only meager illumination provided by a single, bare bulb swinging gently, hypnotically, from the ceiling. The old man led us to a closed door at the very end of the hallway. "In there," he said, gesturing with a trembling, skeletal hand. "Please. Help him." I reached instinctively for the doorknob, but Charlie's hand, cold and clammy, clamped onto my arm, stopping me short. His face was a ghastly white, his eyes wide and dilated with undisguised horror. "Jake," he whispered, his voice a barely audible tremor. "Something's not right here. We should call for backup." I hesitated. Charlie was right. Every fiber of my being, every honed paramedic instinct, was screaming at me to turn, to flee this house and never cast a backward glance. But I could distinctly hear labored, ragged breathing emanating from behind the ominous door. Someone was in there. Someone who, despite all the red flags, might desperately need our help. "We can't leave," I said firmly, my voice unwavering. "Not if there's a chance we can save a life." Before Charlie could offer any further protest, I turned the knob and pushed the door slowly open. The smell hit me first, a coppery, visceral tang that made my stomach lurch violently. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the oppressive darkness, I fumbled frantically for my flashlight. The powerful beam illuminated a scene that would forever claw at the edges of my nightmares for years to come. The walls were utterly consumed by photographs, hundreds, perhaps thousands of them, overlapping and haphazardly pinned up like some grotesque, macabre mosaic. But these were not joyous family snapshots or sun-drenched vacation memories. These were images of death. Crime scene photos. Autopsy shots. Pictures of gruesome accidents and brutal murders, and other things too utterly depraved and incomprehensible to even begin to process. In the chilling center of the room, on a bed that appeared not to have been changed in decades, lay a figure. For a terrifying moment, I thought it was just another corpse, another subject meticulously captured in one of those terrible, terrible photographs. But then, with a jolt, I saw the chest, barely, almost imperceptibly, rise and fall with shallow, gasping breaths. "Oh God," Charlie whispered behind me. I heard the sickening thud of our medical bags hitting the floor, followed by the unmistakable sound of retching. I forced myself to move closer to the bed, my training, a fragile anchor in this sea of horror, kicking in despite the overwhelming revulsion. The man on the bed was ancient, truly ancient, his skin like brittle parchment stretched taut over prominent bone. His eyes were wide open, staring blankly, disturbingly, at the stained, cracked ceiling. "Sir?" I said, my voice sounding strangely distant and alien to my own ears. "Can you hear me? We're here to help." There was no response, no flicker of recognition, no indication that he was even remotely aware of our presence. I reached for his wrist, my fingers searching for a pulse. It was there, a faint, thready beat, but desperately weak. "Charlie!" I called, trying with all my might to keep my voice steady, professional. "I need you to pull it together. We have a patient here." But Charlie wasn't listening. He was staring, transfixed, at the walls, his face a mask of abject terror. "Jake," he said, his voice cracking, barely a whisper. "Look at the dates on these photos." I glanced at the nearest image, a particularly gruesome shot of a fiery car accident. The date stamp in the corner made my blood run cold. It was tomorrow's date. as the horrifying implications of what I was witnessing began to slowly, inexorably, sink in. A low, guttural chuckle echoed from the doorway. The old man who had ushered us into this nightmare stood there, a smile on his face that sent fresh shivers of pure dread down my spine. "You boys sure took your time getting here," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, deeper, chillingly menacing. "But that's all right. You're right on schedule." I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, to scream, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin violently around me as the terrible, undeniable truth slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. We weren't here to save anyone. We were here to become part of this macabre collection. The old man's smile widened, revealing teeth that were unnaturally, disturbingly sharp. "Don't worry," he said, stepping fully into the room and slowly, deliberately, closing the door behind him. "Your pictures will look lovely on the wall. What happened next is a blur in my memory, a chaotic, terrifying maelstrom. There was a desperate, frantic struggle. I remember the glint of a blade. Charlie's scream, abruptly cut short. The coppery taste of my own blood in my mouth. Somehow, through sheer, primal adrenaline and blind, impossible luck, I managed to fight my way past the old man and stumble down the narrow, twisting stairs. I burst out of the house and into the raging, unforgiving storm, not daring to cast a single glance backward. The wind tore at me as I stumbled, half crawling, through the impossibly deep snow, my only coherent thought to put as much distance as humanly possible between myself and that house of unspeakable horrors. I don't know how long I ran, or by what miracle I managed to find my way back to civilization. The next clear memory I have is of sitting in the back of a police cruiser, a rough blanket draped around my shivering shoulders, trying desperately to explain to skeptical, disbelieving officers what I had witnessed. They found the house, eventually, but it was empty. No old men. No room full of grotesque photographs. No sign of Charlie. Just an abandoned, dilapidated cabin slowly being reclaimed by the encroaching forest. The official report, a cold, clinical dismissal, chalked it up to hallucinations brought on by extreme stress and the brutal weather conditions. Charlie was listed as missing, presumed dead in the blizzard. But I know what I saw. I know what was in that room. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls like a mournful ghost outside my window, I think I can hear Charlie's voice, a faint, desperate plea for help. And I wonder, with a dread that chills me to my very core, if somewhere out there, in a room filled with death, there's a photograph of me, with tomorrow's date. I don't work as a paramedic anymore. I can't bring myself to answer those late-night calls, to drive down dark, lonely, desolate roads. But I keep a scanner in my room, always listening. And every time I hear about a call to a remote, isolated address, and every time the storm winds begin to pick up their mournful, chilling song, I say a silent, desperate prayer for those brave, unsuspecting souls heading out into the night. Because I know what's waiting for them in the darkness. And I know that sometimes, the real monsters aren't the ones in the stories. They're the ones waiting patiently behind closed doors, with smiles like polished knives and rooms filled with stolen souls. Story 5. The first message appeared on my phone at 2:17 a.m., jolting me from a fitful sleep. "We know what you did last summer." I blinked at the screen, confusion giving way to a creeping sense of dread. It wasn't the words themselves that chilled me to the bone. but the fact that they were followed by a detailed itinerary of my business trip from the previous year, information that should have been known only to me and my company's travel department. I'm Sarah Chen, a senior account executive for a multinational tech firm. My job involves frequent travel, staying in upscale hotels, and maintaining a polished, professional image. But in that moment, staring at my phone in the dark of my hotel room, I felt exposed, vulnerable, and utterly alone. The Grandview Hotel had seemed like any other high-end establishment when I checked in earlier that evening: marble floors, crystal chandeliers, staffed with plastered-on smiles, the usual trappings of luxury that had long since lost their luster for me. I had barely paid attention during check-in, my mind already on the big presentation I had scheduled for the next day. Now, as I sat up in bed, the opulence of the room felt oppressive. The heavy curtains drawn against the city lights outside seemed to press in on me. I fumbled for the bedside lamp, needing to dispel the shadows that suddenly seemed full of lurking threats. With shaking hands, I tried to trace the number that had sent the message, but it came up as unknown. I considered calling hotel security, but hesitated. What would I say? That I'd received a creepy text? They'd probably dismiss it as a prank. As I debated what to do, another message flashed across my screen: "Look outside your window." My heart leaped into my throat. I wanted to ignore it, to convince myself it was just a coincidence, a sick joke. But my body moved of its own accord, drawn to the window like a moth to a flame. With trembling fingers, I parted the curtains just enough to peer out. At first, I saw nothing but the glittering cityscape 15 floors below. Then, movement caught my eye. In the building across the street, a figure stood at a window directly facing my room. Even from this distance, I could see they were holding up a phone, its screen glowing in the darkness. I let the curtain fall back into place, my mind reeling. This wasn't just a digital breach. Someone was physically watching me. The reality of the situation crashed over me like a wave, leaving me gasping for air. I grabbed my laptop, desperate to find out how much of my personal information had been compromised. As soon as I opened it, I knew something was wrong. Files I didn't recognize cluttered the desktop, and my browser history showed searches I had never made. A notification popped up, an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line read, "Your secrets are ours now." With a sense of impending doom, I opened the email. Attached were dozens of files, copies of my emails, photos from my phone, even scans of personal documents I kept in a locked drawer at home. The message itself was brief: "We own you, Sarah. Do exactly as we say or everyone will know everything." Panic clawed at my throat. How had they gotten all this? My mind raced through possibilities: a hacked Wi-Fi network, a compromised company server, spyware on my devices. But the level of access they had went beyond simple digital theft. This felt personal, targeted. I needed help, but who could I trust? Calling the police seemed futile. By the time they arrived, any evidence could be erased. My company's IT department? They'd probably just locked me out of the system, seeing me as a security risk. I felt paralyzed, trapped in a nightmare of ones and zeros. A soft knock at the door made me jump, a small scream escaping my lips. "Miss Chen?" A voice called. "This is hotel security. We've received some concerns about activity in your room. May we come in for a moment?" Relief flooded through me. Someone had noticed, something was wrong, help was here. But as I moved towards the door, my phone buzzed again. Don't let them in. They're not who they say they are. I froze, my hand halfway to the door handle. How did they know someone was at my door? Were they watching me right now? The thought sent a shiver down my spine. Miss Chen. The voice called again, more insistent this time. We need you to open the door. I pressed my eye to the peephole. Two men in hotel security uniforms stood outside, their faces impassive. Everything looked normal, but the warning on my phone made me hesitate. I'm fine, I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There's no problem here. Ma'am, we have reports of unauthorized access to the hotel systems originating from your room. We need to investigate immediately. My blood ran cold. They knew about the hacking. But were they really here to help, or were they part of whatever sick game was being played? I backed away from the door, my mind racing. I'm calling my company's security team, I said, loud enough for them to hear. They'll coordinate with you directly. There was a pause, then the sound of a key card being swiped. The lock disengaged with a click. Panic surged through me as I realized they were coming in whether I wanted them to or not. I grabbed my phone and laptop, ducking into the bathroom and locking the door just as I heard the room's main door open. Heart pounding, I turned on the shower to mask any noise and frantically typed a message to my company's emergency contact. Help. Grandview Hotel, room 1506. Security breach. Don't trust hotel staff. I hit send, praying it would reach someone who could help. Outside, I could hear the men moving around the room, their voices low and urgent. She's not here. Check the balcony. I'll take the bathroom. A heavy knock on the bathroom door made me jump. Miss Chen, we know you're in there. Please come out. We're here to help. I stayed silent, my eyes darting around the small space, looking for any means of escape. The tiny window was barely big enough to fit my arm through, let alone my whole body. I was trapped. The knocking became more insistent. Miss Chen, we're coming in. Stand back from the door. I heard the sound of a key card again and realized with horror that even the bathroom lock wouldn't keep them out. In desperation, I did the only thing I could think of. I turned off the lights and climbed into the bathtub, pulling the shower curtain closed. The door opened with a bang. Footsteps entered, pausing just inside. I held my breath, trying to make myself as small as possible. Damn it, a voice muttered. Where the hell did she go? More footsteps, coming closer to the tub. I could see a shadow through the curtain, looming larger. A hand grasped the edge of the curtain, and I knew I was out of options. Just then, a commotion erupted from the main room, new voices, shouting orders. The man in the bathroom swore under his breath and rushed out. I stayed frozen in place, unsure what was happening. Had my message gotten through? Or was this just another part of the nightmare? Miss Chen. A new voice called out. This is Agent Reeves with the FBI. You're safe now. You can come out. Cautiously, I peeked around the shower curtain. A woman in a dark suit stood in the doorway, her badge clearly visible. Behind her, I could see more agents securing the room. As I stepped out of the tub on shaky legs, the full impact of what had happened hit me. I had been targeted, my privacy invaded, my sense of security shattered. And for what? What did they want from me? Over the next few hours, As I answered questions and gave statements, the pieces began to fall into place. The hotel systems had indeed been breached, but not by me. A sophisticated hacking group had been using the Grandview as a base of operations, targeting high-level executives and government officials who stayed there. I had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time, my own devices compromised as soon as I connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi. The security guards were part of the hacking team, sent to eliminate the evidence, and me, when they realized their operation had been discovered. As dawn broke over the city, I sat in a secure room at the local FBI office, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Agent Reeves sat across from me, her face sympathetic but professional. "Miss Chen, know this has been a traumatic experience," she said. "But I need you to understand, this isn't over. The people behind this are still out there, and they have your information. We'll do everything we can to protect you, but your life is going to change." I nodded numbly, the reality of the situation sinking in. My sense of privacy, of control over my own life, had been shattered. How could I ever feel safe again, knowing that strangers had access to my most personal information? As I left the FBI office, stepping into a world that suddenly seemed full of hidden threats, I realized that the real horror wasn't the physical danger I had faced. It was the knowledge that in our hyper-connected world, our lives are more exposed than we ever realize. And sometimes, the monsters aren't hiding under the bed or in dark alleys. They're hiding in the shadows of the digital world, waiting to turn our own information against us. I checked into a new hotel that night, under an assumed name. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, someone was watching, waiting for the right moment to strike again. In the digital age, true privacy might just be an illusion, and none of us are as safe as we think we are. Story 6. The mud squelched beneath our tires, a sound that would undoubtedly haunt my nightmares for years to come. As our car sank deeper into the mire, I could feel Lily's eyes on me, silently posing the question we were both too terrified to voice aloud: what have we gotten ourselves into? It was supposed to be a simple shortcut, a clever way to shave an hour off our drive back to the city after a blissful weekend getaway in the tranquil countryside. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in ominous shades of bruised purple and fiery red, I realized that our little detour had twisted into something far more sinister. I'm Jake, and my girlfriend, Lily, and I had been dating for about a year. We both toiled away at high-stress jobs in finance, and this weekend trip was meant to be a precious chance to unwind, to reconnect, far from the incessant buzz of emails and the tyranny of phone calls. Now, as I stared blankly at the mud-caked wheels of our humble sedan, I would have willingly given anything at all, to be back in my cramped office cubicle. "Maybe we should try rocking it back and forth," Lily suggested, her voice tight with barely contained panic. I merely nodded, not trusting myself to speak, my throat constricted by a burgeoning fear. I slammed the car into reverse, then drive, then reverse again. The engine whined in desperate protest, a pathetic, dying gasp, but we remained stubbornly immobile, rooted to the spot. After 10 agonizing minutes of futile attempts, I slumped back into my seat, a crushing wave of defeat washing over me. We were well and truly stuck. "I'll try calling for a tow truck," Lily said, her trembling hand pulling out her phone. Her face fell almost immediately, mirroring my own despair. "No signal." "Of course, there isn't." I peered out the windshield, trying desperately to orient myself in the rapidly fading light. The dirt road we had so foolishly turned onto stretched out before us, a dark, winding ribbon disappearing into the impenetrable depths of a thick, ancient forest. Behind us, it curved deceptively around a low hill, completely obscuring the way we had come. We hadn't passed any houses, any flickering signs of civilization, for at least 20 minutes before our ill-fated entanglement with the mud. "We can't stay here all night," I muttered, the words more to fill the suffocating silence than anything else. "I guess I'll have to walk back, see if I can find help." Lily's hand shot out, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "You can't go out there alone. We don't even know where we are." She was right, of course. The mere thought of wandering aimlessly through those dark, whispering woods alone sent a fresh wave of ice-cold dread down my spine. But what other choice did we have? Before I could respond, a flicker of light caught my eye, headlights, distant but unmistakably approaching, coming around the bend behind us. Relief, so potent it almost made me dizzy, flooded through me. "See?" I gasped, pointing. "Someone's coming. We'll be out of here in no time." But as the vehicle drew closer, that fragile relief curdled and soured into a deep, unsettling unease. It was an ancient pickup truck, its once white paint now a grotesque patchwork of rust and dried mud. It slowed as it approached, coming to a final, sputtering stop a few yards behind us. Two men emerged, both clad in worn, grimy overalls and heavy boots caked with the same thick mud that held us captive. The driver, a tall, gaunt man with a scraggly, unkempt beard, approached my window. I rolled it down, forcing myself to ignore the cacophony of warning bells clanging in the back of my mind. "You folks look like you could use some help," he drawled, his voice gravelly and thick with a local accent I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, we're stuck pretty good," I replied, forcing a brittle smile to my lips. "Don't suppose you have a tow rope?" The man's companion, shorter and stockier but possessing the same unkempt, unsettling appearance, let out a wheezing, humorless laugh. "Tow rope won't do you no good here, city boy. That there's Blackwood Bog. Like quicksand, it is. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink." I glanced at Lily, seeing my own gnawing uncertainty perfectly mirrored in her wide eyes. Something about these men set my teeth on edge, prickling my skin with an indefinable fear. But they were the only help we were likely to find out here, isolated and vulnerable. "Is there a garage nearby?" I asked, my voice betraying a slight tremor. "Or maybe we could use your phone to call for a tow truck?" The tall man shook his head, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It never quite reached his cold, dead eyes. "Ain't no garages around here, and cell phones don't work in these parts. Too many hills, they say." He paused, seeming to ponder something, a calculating glint in his eye. "Tell you what, we can take you back to our place. Got a landline there, and my cousin Jeb's got a tractor. Might be able to pull you out come morning." Every single instinct I possessed screamed at me to refuse, to lock the doors and brave the night in the mud, whatever the consequences. But what choice did we truly have? We couldn't possibly stay here all night, exposed and freezing, and wandering off into those impenetrable woods would be nothing short of suicide. I looked at Lily, silently asking for her opinion. She gave a small, hesitant nod, her face etched with resignation. "That's very kind of you," I said, turning back to the man, the words tasting like cash in my mouth. "We'd really appreciate the help." His smile widened, revealing teeth stained a ghastly yellow from years of tobacco. "Ain't no trouble at all. We take care of our own round here." The way he said it, the possessive, chilling emphasis on our own, sent a fresh shiver down my spine. We grabbed our phones and wallets, locking the car behind us with a click that sounded ridiculously fragile in the vast silence. As we approached the pickup, I noticed for the first time that it had no license plate, just another unsettling detail that made my skin crawl. The interior of the truck reeked of stale cigarettes and something else, something metallic and profoundly unpleasant that I couldn't quite identify. Lily pressed close to me in the cramped back seat, her hand finding mine and squeezing tight, her knuckles white. As we bumped and swayed along the dark, unpaved road, the tall man, who had introduced himself as Cyrus, kept up a steady stream of rambling chatter. He talked about the isolated area, about how the folks around here didn't take kindly to outsiders, about how unnervingly easy it was to get lost in these woods and never be found. "Yep, these parts can be mighty dangerous if you don't know your way around," he said, his eyes meeting mine in the rearview mirror, a knowing, unsettling glint in their depths. "Good thing you ran into us, eh?" I mumbled a non-committal agreement, my mouth dry as dust. Every turn of the road took us deeper into the oppressive wilderness, further from any flickering hope of rescue. I tried desperately to keep track of our route, to mark mental landmarks, but in the impenetrable darkness, every gnarled tree looked identical, every winding path indistinguishable from the last. After what felt like an agonizing eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, we turned sharply onto a narrow, barely discernible dirt track. The truck bounced and swayed violently, branches scraping with a grating sound against the windows, a chilling prelude to what lay ahead. Finally, we emerged into a small, desolate clearing. The house, if you could even call it that, looked like something violently ripped from the pages of a horror story. It was a ramshackle, two-story affair, its faded paint peeling like diseased skin, shutters hanging askew, broken and mournful. A few outbuildings lurked in the deeper shadows, their purpose unsettlingly unclear. The entire grim scene was illuminated by a single, bare bulb swinging precariously over the porch, casting everything in a sickly, jaundiced yellow glow. "Home sweet home," Cyrus announced, killing the engine with a decisive click. As we gingerly climbed out of the truck, I noticed a subtle movement in one of the upstairs windows. A face, pale and gaunt, peered out for a fleeting instant before quickly disappearing behind a ragged, grimy curtain. Cyrus must have caught my gaze. "That's just Ma," he said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Don't mind her. She ain't been right since Pa passed." He led us up the creaking porch steps, the warped boards groaning ominously beneath our hesitant feet. The front door, seemingly of its own accord, swung open just before we reached it, revealing a woman who could have been Cyrus's twin, right down to the tobacco-stained teeth. "Well now, what have we here?" she drawled, her eyes raking over us with undisguised, unsettling curiosity. "City folk got themselves stuck in Blackwood Bog?" Cyrus here lent him a hand, the stockier man, who still hadn't uttered a single word, finally rumbled, his voice a low, gravelly growl. "Thought we'd lend him a hand." The woman's smile, a grotesque rictus that never reached her cold eyes, widened. "How neighborly of you, brother. Come on in then, I'm sure our guests are parched after their ordeal." The interior of the house was no better than its decaying exterior: peeling wallpaper, carpet stained with unidentifiable, ancient grime, and an overwhelming, cloying smell of mildew mixed with something else, something that made my stomach churn with nauseated dread. We were ushered into a cramped, suffocating living room, its walls grotesquely adorned with mounted animal heads in various stages of gruesome decay. Lily's grip on my hand tightened, her fingers digging painfully into my palm, as we sank onto a sagging couch, springs poking uncomfortably through the worn upholstery. "I'll fetch some tea," the woman announced, her voice a sickly sweet melody, before disappearing into what I assumed was the kitchen. Cyrus and his taciturn companion remained standing, looming over us like silent, predatory sentinels. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the rhythmic, agonizing tick-tock of an ancient clock on the mantelpiece, each second echoing like a death knell. "So, about that phone?" I began, attempting to sound casual, but Cyrus cut me off with a dismissive wave of his hand. "All in good time, city boy. First, we gotta make sure you're the right kind of folk." A profound chill, colder than any winter wind, ran down my spine. "The right kind of folk?" I echoed, my voice barely a whisper. Cyrus's smile widened, revealing even more of those stained, yellowed teeth. "You see, we don't get many visitors round these parts. And when we do, well, let's just say we like to make sure they're compatible with our way of life." The woman returned, bearing a tarnished tray with 4 steaming mugs. The liquid inside was dark, almost black, and gave off a pungent, acrid odor that made my eyes water and my throat constrict. "Drink up," she said, thrusting a mug into each of our trembling hands. "It's an old family recipe. Good for what ails you." I glanced at Lily, seeing my own raw terror perfectly reflected in her wide, dilated eyes. We both knew, with a sickening, undeniable certainty, that whatever was in those mugs was not tea. And that if we drank it, our fate would be irrevocably sealed. In that agonizing moment, as Cyrus and his family watched us with a hungry, predatory glint in their eyes, I fully comprehended the true, abyssal horror of our situation. We weren't just lost in the backwoods. We had stumbled, utterly unprepared, into a living nightmare, one that had been carefully cultivated and nurtured by generations of twisted isolation and depravity. The clock ticked on, each second stretching into an eternity. I knew, with a desperate clarity, that we had to act, had to find a way out of this hellish trap. But surrounded by these monstrous people, in this house of unspeakable horrors, any move, any flicker of defiance, felt like it could be our last. As I raised the mug to my lips, forcing myself to pretend to take a sip, my mind raced frantically. How far were we truly from the main road? Could we possibly outrun them in the suffocating darkness of the forest? And even if, by some impossible miracle, we escaped this house, how would we ever find our way back to civilization? The tea's pungent, cloying aroma filled my nostrils, a potent reminder that our innocent weekend getaway had irrevocably devolved into a desperate fight for survival. In the abyssal depths of these dark, whispering woods, far from the fleeting comfort and perceived safety of our normal lives, we were about to discover just how far we would go to stay alive. Story 7. The first note was innocuous enough. A yellow post-it stuck to my computer monitor with a simple message: "Your coffee order, large Americano, 2 sugars." I brushed it off as a kind gesture from a coworker, maybe the new intern trying to make a good impression. It wasn't until the third note appeared, listing my home address and the color of my bedroom curtains, that the icy fingers of fear began to creep up my spine. My name is Evelyn Cross, and I've worked at Sterling and Finch for 5 years as a marketing analyst. It's a typical office job: cubicles, water cooler gossip, the rhythmic hum of photocopiers providing the soundtrack to our 9-to-5 lives. I've always been the quiet one: head down, work hard, go home. I never imagined I'd become the center of a mystery that would turn my mundane life into a waking nightmare. The notes kept coming, appearing on my desk, slipped into my purse, even tucked under my windshield wiper in the parking garage. Each one revealed a piece of information about me that became progressively more personal, more invasive: my favorite book, the name of my first pet, the date of my last gynecologist appointment. I tried to convince myself it was just a prank, albeit a cruel one. But as the weeks wore on and the notes became more frequent, more detailed, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time I entered the office, I felt eyes on me. Casual conversations with coworkers became minefields. Was that a normal question, or were they fishing for information? I started changing up my routine. I'd take different routes to work, varied the times I went to lunch. I even bought new clothes as if I could somehow shed the skin of the person being stalked. But still, the notes came: "You looked lovely in that blue blouse yesterday. It brings out your eyes. I bet that tuna sandwich from the deli on 4th was delicious. You always did love their secret sauce." It was the little details that terrified me most. Whoever was doing this wasn't just following me or watching me at work. They knew things about my past, about my private life that no casual observer could know. I debated going to HR, but what would I say? I had no proof that this wasn't just some elaborate office joke gone too far. And a part of me feared that drawing attention to it might only encourage my stalker. So I suffered in silence, jumping at every unexpected sound, scrutinizing every casual interaction for hidden meanings. My work began to suffer. Dark circles formed under my eyes from sleepless nights spent wondering who among my coworkers harbored this obsession. Was it Tim from accounting, who always lingered a little too long by my desk? Or maybe Sarah, the receptionist, whose smile never quite reached her eyes? Could it be Mr. Sterling himself, the rarely seen CEO, who I'd caught staring at during last year's Christmas party? The paranoia was eating me alive. I started seeing clues everywhere: the way Jerry from IT angled his monitor. Was he watching me through the security cameras? The fact that Melissa always seemed to be in the break room at the same time as me. Coincidence or careful planning? Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the game changed. I arrived at work one Monday to find not a note, but a small box on my desk. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was a single rose and a card that read, "I've waited long enough. Meet me on the roof at midnight if you want answers. Come alone or everyone will know your darkest secret." My blood ran cold. What secret could they possibly know? My mind raced through every mistake, every embarrassing moment, every hidden shame. Nothing seemed big enough to warrant this level of threat. But the not knowing was almost worse than any revelation could be. I spent the day in a fog, barely able to focus on my work. My coworkers must have noticed something was off, but by this point I'd become so withdrawn that no one dared to ask. As the hours ticked by, I wrestled with my decision: should I go to the police? Ignore the demand and risk exposure? Or face my tormentor and finally put an end to this nightmare? In the end, Curiosity and desperation won out. At 11:45 p.m., I found myself climbing the stairs to the roof, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give me away. I clutched my phone in one hand, 911 pre-dialed, and a small canister of pepper spray in the other. The night air was cool on my face as I pushed open the heavy metal door. The roof was dark, lit only by the ambient glow of the city and a waxing moon. For a moment, I thought I was alone. Then, a figure stepped out from behind an air conditioning unit. "Hello, Evelyn," said a voice I recognized instantly. My breath caught in my throat as Mark from Human Resources stepped into the moonlight. Mark, with his easy smile and helpful demeanor. Mark, who I'd confided in just last year about my struggle with depression. Mark, who had access to all of our personal files. "Why?" I managed to choke out, my voice barely above a whisper. He smiled, but it wasn't the warm grin I was used to. This smile was cold, predatory. "Because I could," he said simply. "Do you have any idea how easy it is to manipulate people when you know everything about them? Their fears, their desires, their weaknesses?" As he spoke, he moved closer. I backed away, my grip tightening on the pepper spray. "Stay back," I warned, but my voice shook. Mark laughed. "Or what? You'll spray me? Scream? Go ahead. By the time anyone gets up here, I'll be gone. And tomorrow, everyone in the office will receive an email detailing your history of mental health issues. How long do you think you'll keep your job once people know you're unstable?" I felt like I was going to be sick. "What do you want from me?" His eyes gleamed in the darkness. "I want you to understand your place, Evelyn. Knowledge is power, and I hold all the knowledge here. You're going to do exactly as I say from now on. And if I don't?" He let the threat hang in the air. In that moment, something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the paranoia of the past weeks crystallized into a white-hot rage. Without thinking, I lunged forward, pepper spray forgotten, as my fist connected with Mark's smug face. He stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt, but it was enough. I ran for the door, fumbling with my phone as I fled down the stairs. This time, I didn't hesitate to hit dial. The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements and HR interviews. As it turned out, Mark had been running his little game on multiple employees, using the personal information in their files to manipulate and control them. The company's security was woefully inadequate, allowing him to access data he should never have been able to see. In the end, Mark was arrested, charged with stalking, harassment, and a host of cybercrime offenses. The company, desperate to avoid a lawsuit, offered me a generous settlement and a transfer to any branch I wanted. But as I sat in my apartment at night, the adrenaline finally wearing off, I realized that no amount of money could erase the trauma of the past weeks. The feeling of violation, of having my privacy so thoroughly invaded, would stay with me for a long time. I also knew that this wasn't really the end. In our digital age, our personal information is out there, vulnerable to anyone with the skills and lack of ethics to exploit it. Mark was caught, but how many others like him were out there, using our secrets against us? As I drifted off into an uneasy sleep, one thought kept circling in my mind. In a world where our lives are increasingly lived online, where every click and purchase and search query is recorded and stored, is true privacy even possible anymore? Or are we all just one determined stalker away from having our worst fears exposed? I didn't have the answers, but I knew that from now on I would guard my personal information like the precious resource it is. Because in the end, our secrets are all we truly own, and there will always be someone out there trying to steal them. Story 8. The first night in our new home, I woke to the sound of my daughter's scream. By the time I reached her room, heart pounding, she was sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror. The man in the wall was watching me. "Mommy," she whispered. I checked every corner, looked behind every curtain, but found nothing. I chalked it up to a nightmare, a child's fear of a new place. I was wrong. So terribly, horribly wrong. My name is Clara Vance, and this is the story of how our dream home became a nightmare. When my husband, David, got a promotion that required us to relocate, we saw it as an opportunity for a fresh start. Our realtor showed us dozens of houses, but the moment we stepped into 42 Crimson Lane, we knew it was the one. A beautiful Victorian, lovingly restored with plenty of space for our family of 4. The price was surprisingly reasonable for such a gem, but we didn't question our good fortune. The first few weeks were a whirlwind of unpacking and settling in. Our son, Leo, took to the new house immediately, claiming the attic as his fortress of solitude. Our daughter, Ella, was more hesitant, but we assumed she just needed time to adjust. Then came that first night, and Ella's scream. In the light of day, I convinced myself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination. But as the days passed, Ella's fear only grew. She refused to sleep in her room, insisting on curling up on our bedroom floor. Dark circles formed under her eyes, and her normally bubbly personality became subdued. "The man in the wall doesn't like us being here," she told me one morning over breakfast, her voice barely above a whisper. "He says we need to leave before it's too late." I shared my concerns with David, but he brushed them off. "Kids have imaginary friends all the time," he said. "She'll grow out of it." But it wasn't just Ella. Strange things began happening around the house. Items would disappear, only to turn up in odd places days later. The temperature in certain rooms would drop suddenly, leaving us shivering even in the middle of summer. And sometimes, late at night, I could swear I heard footsteps in the hallway, even though I knew everyone was asleep. One afternoon, while David was at work and the kids were at school, I decided to do some digging into the house's history. The local library had archives of old newspapers, and I spent hours poring over microfiche. What I found chilled me to the bone. In 1923, the house had belonged to a reclusive inventor named Tobias Blackwood. He'd become obsessed with the idea of interdimensional travel, convinced he could create a portal to other worlds. The last article I found described how neighbors had called the police after hearing strange noises coming from the house. When officers arrived, they found Blackwood dead in the basement, his body contorted in ways that defied explanation. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but the reporter noted that the responding officers refused to discuss what they'd seen. I left the library feeling shaken, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed a figure in the upstairs window, a man's silhouette watching me. But it vanished the moment I blinked. That night, I confronted David with what I'd learned. He listened, his face growing more serious with each word. "Clara," he said finally, "I think there's something I need to show you." He led me to the basement, to a corner we'd used for storage. Moving aside some boxes, he revealed a section of wall that looked wrong somehow. The bricks didn't quite line up, and there was a faint line running around the edges as if it were a door. "I found this a few days ago," David admitted. "I didn't want to worry you, but I've been hearing things. Whispers coming from behind here." Together, we pushed against the wall. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a grinding noise that set my teeth on edge, the hidden door swung open. The space beyond was pitch black, the air heavy with the scent of dust and decay. David's flashlight beam revealed a small room, its walls covered in strange symbols and diagrams. In the center stood a metal contraption that looked like a cross between a Tesla coil and a medieval torture device. "Oh my God," I breathed. "Blackwood's lab. It's been here all along." As we stepped into the room, the temperature plummeted. Our breath came out in visible puffs, and I felt a presence pressing in around us, watchful and malevolent. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind us. David spun around, yanking at the handle, but it wouldn't budge. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging us into darkness. And then we heard it, a voice, raspy and filled with a hunger that made my skin crawl. "At last," it said. "New subjects for my experiments." The air in front of us shimmered, and a figure began to take shape. It was vaguely human, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite define. Its edges seemed to blur as if it wasn't fully in our reality. What are you?" David demanded, his voice shaking. The figure's mouth stretched into something approximating a smile. "I am Tobias Blackwood, of course. Or what's left of him. My experiment was a success, you see. I opened a door to another world, but I didn't account for what might come through from the other side." As he spoke, more shapes began to materialize around us, twisted, impossible forms that hurt to look at directly. I felt my sanity beginning to fray at the edges. "For decades I've been trapped between worlds," Blackwood continued, "unable to fully manifest but unable to move on. I've waited so long for a family like yours to move in. Your fear, your belief, it gives me strength. And now, with your help, I can finally complete my work." The other entities moved closer, their non-Euclidean geometries making me dizzy. I clutched David's hand, my mind racing for a way out of this nightmare. That's when I heard Ella's voice, muffled but clear, coming from the other side of the door. "Mommy? Daddy? Are you down there? Ella, run!" I shouted. "Get out of the house!" Blackwood's form flickered, his attention divided. In that moment of distraction, David lunged for the contraption in the center of the room. He grabbed it, straining to lift the heavy metal. "No!" Blackwood shrieked, lunging towards us, but he was too late. With a yell of effort, David hurled the device against the wall. It shattered in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The air itself seemed to tear, a howling vortex opening where the machine had stood. Blackwood and the other entities were drawn towards it, their forms stretching and distorting as they were pulled into the rift. "You fools!" Blackwood's voice echoed as he disappeared into the void. "You've doomed us all." The vortex grew, the edges of the room beginning to warp and bend. I could feel it pulling at me, an irresistible force threatening to drag us into whatever hellish dimension lay beyond. Just when I thought all was lost, the door burst open. Ella stood there, her small face set in determination. In her hands, she held a crumpled piece of paper. I drew the symbols to close the door. she shouted over the roar of the vortex. Like the man in the wall showed me. Before I could stop her, Ella threw the paper into the rift. There was a blinding flash of light, a sound like reality itself tearing, and then silence. We found ourselves lying on the basement floor, the hidden room gone as if it had never existed. The wall was whole, unbroken, no trace remained of Blackwood's lab or the horrors we'd witnessed. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what had happened. Ella told us about the nice man in the wall, not Blackwood, but another spirit who had been trying to warn us, to protect us from what lurked in the house. We put the house up for sale immediately, unable to stay another night under that roof. As we drove away for the last time, I caught a glimpse of a figure in the upstairs window, a man nodding solemnly, a protector standing guard against the darkness that had nearly claimed us. We never spoke publicly about what happened at 42 Crimson Lane. Who would believe us? But sometimes, late at night, I still hear phantom footsteps in the hallway, and I wonder about that rift, that tear in reality. Did we truly close it, or is it still there, waiting for someone else to stumble upon its secrets? One thing I know for certain, our experience changed us forever. We learned that the world is stranger and more dangerous than we ever imagined, that sometimes the things we dismiss as children's fears or overactive imaginations are all too real. And that the boundary between our world and others is far more fragile than we'd like to believe. So if you're ever house hunting and you come across a beautiful old Victorian at a price that seems too good to be true, remember our story. Because sometimes a dream home can hide a nightmare, and the walls, well, they might just be watching. Story 9. The first time I heard the voice crackling through the static, I thought I was losing my mind. It was 2:17 a.m., and I was alone in the radio station, queuing up another late-night track, when suddenly the music cut out. In its place, a raspy whisper filled the airwaves. The bodies are buried beneath the old Blackwood place. I froze, my hand hovering over the control panel, as the voice continued. You're the only one who can uncover the truth, Sarah. Don't let them silence you. My name is Sarah Evans, and I'm the night DJ at WBRK, a small-town radio station in the heart of Fairhaven, population 5,342. Or at least, that's what I thought I was. Little did I know that one cryptic message would plunge me into a world of long-buried secrets, turning my quiet life into a nightmare of conspiracy and danger. At first, I convinced myself it was just a prank. Some bored teenagers had probably hijacked our frequency for a laugh. But as the nights wore on, the messages kept coming, each one more detailed and disturbing than the last. They spoke of corrupt officials, of deals made in the shadows, of innocents who had disappeared over the years. I tried to ignore them, to focus on my job of playing music and reading weather reports. But the voice was persistent, and worse, it knew things about me, personal things I'd never shared on air. It called me by name, mentioned my childhood dog, even described the birthmark on my left shoulder. After a week of this, I couldn't take it anymore. I confided in my boss, station manager David Grayson. I expected him to be concerned, to call in tech support or maybe even the police. Instead, his face went pale, and he laughed it off with a forced casualness that set alarm bells ringing in my head. Probably just some interference from a CB radio, he said, not meeting my eyes. I'll have someone look into it. In the meantime, maybe you should take a few days off. You look tired, Sarah. I didn't take the days off. Instead, I started digging. The voice had mentioned the Blackwood Place, an old farmhouse on the outskirts of town that had been abandoned for decades. On my next day off, I drove out there, telling myself I was crazy for following the lead of some disembodied voice. The Blackwood Place was exactly as I remembered it from childhood dares and ghost stories, a dilapidated two-story farmhouse, its paint peeling and windows boarded up. As I stood there, staring at the overgrown yard, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind. I was about to leave when I noticed something odd: fresh tire tracks leading around to the back of the house. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't used the old driveway. Heart pounding, I followed the tracks. They led to a patch of ground behind the barn that looked recently disturbed. Without really thinking about what I was doing, I started to dig with my bare hands. I had barely broken the surface when a voice behind me made me jump out of my skin. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Miss Evans." I whirled around to find Sheriff Thompson standing there, his hand resting casually on his holstered gun. I had known Earl Thompson my whole life. He'd been sheriff since before I was born. But in that moment, looking into his cold eyes, I felt like I was seeing him for the first time. Just, looking for my dog, I stammered, knowing how ridiculous it sounded even as the words left my mouth. "I thought I saw him run back here." The sheriff's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Funny, I didn't know you had a dog. Why don't you come on down to the station with me? We need to have a little chat about trespassing and other things." I knew in that moment that if I got into his car, I might never be seen again. So I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, crashing through the overgrown fields, branches whipping my face. I could hear the sheriff shouting behind me, but I didn't look back. Somehow, I made it to my car and peeled out of there, gravel spraying behind me. In my rearview mirror, I saw the sheriff emerge from the fields, talking urgently into his radio. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind reeling. What had I stumbled into? What was buried on that farm? And who was trying to tell me about it? When I finally felt safe enough to stop, I pulled into a rest area and tried to think. I couldn't go home. That would be the first place they'd look. I couldn't go to the police. And if the sheriff was involved, who knew how deep this went? As if an answer to my silent questions, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Booth 3 at Denny's. 1 hour. Come alone if you want answers." Every instinct told me not to go, that this was how people ended up dead in ditches. But I was in too deep now. I needed to know the truth. An hour later, I sat in a vinyl booth at Denny's, my hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, trying not to look as terrified as I felt. The door chimed, and an old man shuffled in. He looked like any other retiree you'd see in a small town, but when his eyes met mine, I knew he was the one I was waiting for. He slid into the booth across from me without a word, his roomy eyes darting around the nearly empty restaurant. "You're the voice on the radio," I said. It wasn't a question. He nodded, a sad smile creasing his weathered face. "Name's Frank. I used to work for the station back in the 70s, before everything changed." Over the next hour, Frank unraveled a tale so outlandish I would have laughed if I hadn't seen the deadly seriousness in his eyes. He spoke of a town built on secrets, of a cabal of powerful men who had been running things from the shadows for decades. The radio station, he said, was at the heart of it all. WBRK isn't just a radio station, Frank explained, his voice barely above a whisper. It's a cover. The real signal, the one that matters, is broadcast on a frequency nobody's supposed to know about. They use it to communicate, to coordinate their activities. What activities? I asked, dreading the answer. Frank's eyes grew distant. Bad things, Sarah. Things that would make your skin crawl. People who asked too many questions, who threatened to expose the truth. They had a way of disappearing. And the Blackwood place? That's where they ended up. I felt sick. But why tell me? Why now? Because you're different, Frank said, reaching across the table to grasp my hand. You've got the gift. You can hear the real signal, the one they think is secure. That's why I've been reaching out to you. You're our only hope of exposing them, of ending this once and for all. Before I could ask any more questions, Frank stiffened, his eyes focused on something over my shoulder, and his face drained of color. They're here. He hissed. Run. Don't trust anyone, and whatever you do, don't stop broadcasting. With surprising agility for a man his age, Frank slid out of the booth and hurried towards the back of the restaurant. I turned to see what had spooked him and saw David Grayson, my boss, entering the Denny's with two men I didn't recognize. Their eyes locked onto me, and I knew with chilling certainty that they weren't here for the Grand Slam breakfast. I slipped out the side door, my mind racing. Frank's words echoed in my head, don't stop broadcasting. But how? They would be watching the station. Then it hit me, the old pirate radio set up in my garage, a relic from my rebellious teenage years. As I drove home, taking a circuitous route to shake any tails, I formulated a plan. I would use the pirate radio to broadcast everything I knew, to blow this whole conspiracy wide open. It was probably suicide, but I couldn't stay silent. Not anymore. I spent the next 48 hours in a fever of activity, gathering evidence, recording my story, and preparing for the broadcast that would change everything. I slept in short bursts, jumping at every sound, half expecting to see shadowy figures breaking down my door. Finally, as the sun set on the second day, I was ready. With shaking hands, I powered up the old transmitter. Static filled the air, and then my voice crackled through the speakers. This is Sarah Evans, and I'm here to tell you the truth about Fairhaven. Everything you thought you knew is a lie. I spoke for hours, laying out every detail Frank had told me, every scrap of evidence I'd uncovered. I named names, exposed decades of corruption and violence. As I talked, I could almost feel the town waking up, the truth spreading like wildfire. I was so focused on my broadcast that I almost missed the sound of approaching sirens. They were coming for me, the men behind the conspiracy, their facades of respectability stripped away by my words. But it was too late for them to stop it. The truth was out there now, spreading across the airwaves, impossible to contain. As I heard the screech of tires in my driveway, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. Whatever happened next, Fairhaven would never be the same. The dark secrets hidden beneath its quaint, small-town exterior had been dragged into the light, and me? I was just the messenger, the unlikely hero who had given voice to the whispers and the static. The door burst open, flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, but I kept talking, my voice steady now. Because in that moment, I wasn't just Sarah Evans, small-town DJ. I was the voice of truth, the breaker of silence. and no matter what they did to me, that voice would never be silenced again. Story 10. The headlights of the truck ahead of me winked out as it veered off the lonely highway and plunged into a dense forest. I hesitated for a moment, my hands tightening on the steering wheel. This wasn't part of my usual route, but a strange curiosity, a tug at the edge of my consciousness, got the better of me. I'd been driving these desolate roads for 15 years, and I'd never seen another rig take that particular turn. As I followed the fading taillights into the deepening darkness, I had no idea I was about to stumble into a world of hidden secrets, arcane rituals, and profound danger that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. My name's Marcus, and I've been a long-haul trucker since I was old enough to get my commercial license. It's a solitary existence, just me and the endless ribbon of asphalt stretching out before me, the rhythmic hum of the engine a constant companion. But that night, as I guided my massive rig down that unmarked forest road, I felt a prickle of unease, a cold sensation at the back of my neck, that I simply couldn't shake. The ancient trees pressed in close on either side, their skeletal branches scraping like grasping claws against the sides of my truck, a chilling prelude to what lay ahead. I was just about to concede defeat and turn my rig around when, suddenly, the forest canopy parted, opening into a surprisingly large clearing. What I saw there made me slam on the brakes, my jaw dropping in sheer disbelief. Dozens of big rigs were parked in a rough, illuminated circle, their powerful headlights cutting through the oppressive gloom, revealing a scene that looked like something pulled directly from a bizarre, half-forgotten dream. In the precise center of the illuminated circle, a group of people, truckers, by the look of their worn, utilitarian clothes, were gathered around a roaring bonfire. They were chanting, their voices rising and falling in a low, rhythmic cadence that sent profound chills down my spine, vibrating deep within my bones. I killed my engine, plunging my cab into a sudden, unsettling silence, and sat there for a moment, trying desperately to make sense of the impossible tableau unfolding before me. Part of me, the rational, survival instinct part, screamed to throw the truck in reverse and get the hell out of there, to flee this madness. But another part, the part that had always harbored a quiet hunger for something more than the mundane monotony of the open road, urged me, compelled me, to investigate. Slowly, reluctantly, I climbed down from the cab, my feet hitting the damp earth with a soft thud. As soon as my boots touched the ground, every head in the clearing, as if on cue, turned simultaneously to look at me. The chanting stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie, suffocating silence broken only by the hungry crackling of the bonfire. A man stepped forward from the group, detaching himself from the circle of figures. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a salt and pepper beard and eyes that seemed to glow with an unnerving, inner light in the flickering fire. "Welcome, brother," he said, his voice deep and resonant, resonating in my chest. "We've been expecting you." I blinked in genuine surprise. Expecting me? But I just stumbled upon this place by accident. The man, clearly the undisputed leader of this strange gathering, smiled, a knowing, almost ancient expression. "There are no accidents on the road, my friend. The highway brought you here for a reason." He introduced himself as Gideon and began to explain. This clandestine group called themselves the Brotherhood of the Endless Road. They were an ancient, shadowy order of truckers, their lineage stretching back to the very first traders who had hauled goods across vast, untamed distances. They held a profound belief that the very act of driving, of moving constantly and tirelessly between disparate places, granted them a unique, almost mystical connection to the very fabric of reality itself. "We're more than just drivers, Marcus," Gideon said, his piercing eyes boring into mine with unnerving intensity. "We're the circulatory system of the world. We keep things moving, keep the lifeblood of commerce flowing. And that gives us power. Power most people can't even begin to comprehend." As he spoke, the other truckers, like shadows coalescing, moved closer, forming a tighter circle around us. I noticed that many of them wore strange amulets, miniature steering wheels or tiny model trucks, intricately cast in what looked like tarnished silver. "But with great power comes great responsibility," Gideon continued, his voice solemn. "There are forces out there that would use the roads for evil. Dark energies that feed on accidents, on the pain and suffering of travelers. It's our sacred job to keep those forces at bay, to protect the highways and everyone who uses them." It sounded utterly insane. A part of me was absolutely certain I had finally succumbed to exhaustion, fallen asleep at the wheel, and was now merely dreaming all of this. But there was an undeniable, almost palpable energy in the air, a profound sense of something ancient and powerful stirring just beneath the fragile surface of everyday reality. "So, what do you want from me?" I asked, my mouth suddenly dry, my voice barely a whisper. Gideon's smile widened, a knowing, almost triumphant expression. "We want you to join us, Marcus. Become part of the Brotherhood. Help us in our sacred duty." Before I could even begin to respond, one of the other truckers, a hulking figure with a grizzled face, stepped forward. "Hold on, Gideon," he rumbled, his voice gruff, a hint of suspicion in his tone. "We can't just let anyone join. He has to prove himself first." Gideon nodded solemnly. "You're right, of course. Marcus, are you willing to undergo the trials? To prove your worth to the Brotherhood?" I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to scramble back into my truck and drive until this entire bizarre night was nothing more than a distant, faded memory. But something, an unseen force, held me there, a powerful concoction of raw curiosity and a strange, almost preordained sense of destiny. "What kind of trials?" I asked, my voice barely audible. The next few hours were a surreal blur of bizarre rituals and unsettling tests. They blindfolded me and had me navigate a treacherous obstacle course using only the distant, throbbing sound of a diesel engine as a guide. They quizzed me on obscure trucking regulations and the convoluted history of the American highway system. At one point, I found myself arm wrestling a man twice my size while simultaneously reciting, without error, the names of every major interchange from coast to coast. But the final trial, the ultimate test, was the most intensely terrifying. They led me to an old, beat-up semi-truck that looked like it had survived a war, its paint chipped and its chrome scarred. "This is the ghost rig," Gideon explained, his voice low, almost reverent. "Legend has it that it's possessed by the tormented spirit of a driver who died on the road. Your task is to drive it to the next truck stop and back without letting it veer off course, without succumbing to its influence." I climbed into the cab, my hands shaking slightly as I gripped the cold, worn steering wheel. The moment I turned the key, I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was no ordinary truck. The engine roared to life with a sound that was almost animalistic, a guttural growl, and I could feel strange, unnatural vibrations through the seat that had nothing, absolutely nothing, to do with the motor. As I pulled onto the desolate highway, the wheel began to fight me. It was subtle at first, a slight, almost imperceptible pull to the left or right, a whisper of resistance. But as the miles ticked by, as the oppressive darkness of the road swallowed me whole, it grew stronger, more insistent. The truck seemed utterly determined to veer off into the oncoming lane, to collide head-on with an unseen phantom, or to simply run itself off the road entirely, plunging into the abyss. Sweat poured down my face in rivulets, stinging my eyes, as I wrestled desperately with the steering wheel, my muscles screaming in protest. The speedometer crept higher and higher, a malicious needle climbing towards an impossible speed, even though my foot was nowhere near the accelerator. Dark, indistinct shapes flitted at the edges of my vision, ephemeral specters dancing just beyond my full perception, and I could have sworn I heard chilling whispers coming from the CB radio, even though it wasn't even turned on. Just when I thought my strength would give out, when I felt the tendrils of madness beginning to creep into my mind, I saw the blessed, welcoming lights of the truck stop ahead, a beacon in the oppressive darkness. With a final, agonizing surge of strength, I muscled the ghost rig into the parking lot, wrenching the wheel with all my might. As soon as I cut the engine, the oppressive, malevolent atmosphere inside the cab vanished as abruptly as it had appeared. I sat there for a moment, my shirt soaked with sweat, my arms trembling uncontrollably from the sheer, raw effort. The drive back to the clearing was almost eerily calm in comparison, the ghost rig now docile, as if its inner demon had been temporarily sated. When I finally pulled back into the clearing, the Brotherhood erupted in triumphant cheers, a resounding roar that filled the night. I stumbled out of the cab on shaky legs, only to be engulfed in a sea of backslaps and enthusiastic handshakes. "You did it, brother," Gideon said, beaming with an almost paternal pride. "And you've proven yourself worthy of joining our ranks." The initiation ceremony that followed was solemn and strange. I swore oaths to protect the roads and those who travel them, to uphold the ancient, unspoken traditions of the Brotherhood, and to keep our very existence a sacred secret from the oblivious outside world. They gave me one of those silver amulets, a tiny, intricately crafted truck that seemed to hum with a low, vibrant energy when I touched it, a tangible link to my new, unsettling reality. As dawn broke over the clearing, painting the sky in hues of soft pink and nascent gold, I climbed back into my own familiar rig, my head spinning with the impossible, unbelievable events that had just transpired. Gideon approached my window one last time, his voice low and serious. "Remember, Marcus," he said, his eyes holding a profound, ancient wisdom. "You're one of us now. The road will call on you when it needs you. Be ready to answer." In the weeks and months that followed, I tried, desperately, to convince myself it had all been some kind of shared hallucination, a collective delusion. Maybe someone had spiked the coffee at that last truck stop, a potent hallucinogen slipped into my brew. But every time I felt the reassuring, yet strangely heavy, weight of that silver amulet against my chest, I knew, with a cold, undeniable certainty, that it had been terrifyingly real. And Gideon was right, the road did call. I found myself instinctively avoiding treacherous stretches of highway just moments before major pileups miraculously occurred. I'd pick up solitary hitchhikers who, eerily, turned out to be lost souls, trapped between this world and the next, needing someone, a guardian, to drive them to their final, ethereal rest. Once, in a terrifying, adrenaline-fueled encounter, I even faced off against a phantom truck, a malevolent apparition of steel and shadow, that was trying, with terrifying purpose, to run a school bus full of sleeping children off the road. The life of a long-haul trucker was never easy, a solitary grind, but now it had taken on a whole new dimension of profound weirdness and unimaginable danger. Yet, strangely, almost inexplicably, I wouldn't have it any other way. Because now I know the chilling truth, that the highways and byways of this country are more than just stretches of asphalt and concrete. They're alive, a sentient, pulsating entity, in a way most people will never understand. And as long as I'm behind the wheel, as long as I'm a steadfast part of the brotherhood of the endless road, I'll be there, a silent guardian, to protect them. Because out here, in the inky blackness of night, with nothing but 18 wheels and a full tank of diesel, someone has to keep the real nightmares at bay. So if you're ever driving late at night, the only sound the hum of your engine, and you see a truck, perhaps even my rig, pull off onto a road that wasn't there a moment before, just keep on driving. Some secrets of the highway are simply better left undiscovered. But rest easy knowing that we're out here, the Brotherhood, keeping a vigilant watch over the endless, shadowed road. Stay safe, and keep on trucking. Story 11. The bonfire blazed, a hypnotic dance of flames casting long, flickering shadows across the secluded beach. Laughter mingled with the rhythmic crash of waves, stories shared beneath a sky dusted with nascent stars. It was meant to be the perfect, idyllic farewell to a perfect summer, a final, cherished memory before life pulled us in disparate directions. None of us, caught in that golden bubble of youth and camaraderie, could have ever imagined that beyond our circle of firelight, hidden amongst the whispering dunes, a sinister plot was already unfolding, one that would shatter our innocence and plunge us into a nightmare we never saw coming. I'm Leo, and this is the story of how a simple beach bonfire transformed into a night of terror that would etch itself into our souls, haunting us for years to come. There were 5 of us gathered around the fire that night: myself, my girlfriend Maya, our best friends Ben and Chloe, and Chloe's younger brother, Finn. We'd all grown up together in this sleepy coastal town, known as Seabrook. Now, on the cusp of leaving for college, we craved one last hurrah, a final, defiant celebration before the currents of life scattered us to the winds. The night began innocently enough. We roasted marshmallows until they were golden and gooey, shared clandestine beers smuggled from our parents' fridges, and reminisced about endless childhood adventures, the stolen boat rides, the secret forts in the woods, the ill-fated attempts at surfing. The mood was a bittersweet blend of excitement for the unknown future and a tender nostalgia for the cherished past we were leaving behind. It was around midnight when the subtle shift occurred, the first discordant note in our summer symphony. Finn, always the most restless, the one with an insatiable need to explore, decided to go for a solitary walk along the moonlit shoreline. We barely noticed his departure, too engrossed in our own conversations, lost in the comfortable rhythm of shared memories. But when he came running back 15 minutes later, his face chalk white, his eyes wide and dilated with raw, unadulterated fear, we knew, with a sickening lurch in our stomachs, that something was terribly wrong. "Guys," he gasped, breathless, his voice trembling uncontrollably, "you have to come see this. There are people in the dunes. They're doing something weird." We exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to take him seriously. Finn, bless his adventurous heart, had a well-earned reputation for elaborate pranks and wild, embellished stories. But there was something in his voice, a profound tremor of genuine, visceral fear, that silenced our skepticism and made us all pause. "What kind of weird?" Ben asked, ever the pragmatic skeptic, his brow furrowed with concern. Finn shook his head, a frantic, almost uncomprehending gesture. I don't know, man. They were all dressed in black, huddled together. I think I saw weapons. It looked like they were planning something. A chill, colder than any ocean breeze, ran down my spine, tightening its icy grip around my heart. I could see the others felt it too, that sudden, jarring shift from a carefree summer night to something darker, far more dangerous. We should check it out, I heard myself say, trying desperately to keep my voice steady, betraying none of the escalating panic within. If there's really something going on, we need to know. Maya grabbed my arm, her fingers digging painfully into my skin, her eyes wide with frantic urgency. Are you crazy? What if they're dangerous? We should call the police. She had a valid point, of course. A very valid point. But something held me back, a strange mixture of raw curiosity and perhaps some misguided, youthful sense of bravado. Let's just take a quick look, I suggested, the words tasting like ash. If it seems serious, then we'll call the cops. But it could be nothing, right? Maybe just some other kids having their own party. Reluctantly, their faces etched with trepidation, the others agreed. We quickly doused our crackling fire, stomping out the last embers, and followed Finn into the whispering dunes, our phone flashlights cutting weak, trembling beams through the oppressive darkness. The soft, shifting sand beneath our feet felt treacherous, almost alive, and the insistent wind carried whispers that might have been distant voices, or perhaps just our overactive imaginations playing cruel tricks on us. We crested a large, undulating dune, and Finn, his hand shaking, motioned for us to get down. Crawling on our bellies, low to the ground, we peered over the top. What I saw in the hollow below made my blood run cold, turning to ice in my veins. There were about a dozen people gathered in a tight, conspiratorial circle. They wore dark, heavy clothes, their faces completely obscured by deep hoods or unsettling, featureless masks. In the chilling center of the circle, illuminated by a single, anemic lantern, was a makeshift table, meticulously covered with large, unfurled maps and what, even from this distance, looked eerily like detailed blueprints. Holy! Ben whispered beside me, his voice a strained gasp. Are those guns? I squinted, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drum in the suffocating silence. He was right. Several of the figures had holstered weapons at their hips, glinting dully in the weak light. This was no harmless gathering, no clandestine summer party. Whatever we had stumbled upon, it was deadly serious. One man, taller than the others, seemed to be in charge, radiating an undeniable aura of authority that was palpable even from our hiding spot. As we watched, transfixed, he pointed to different spots on the map, his voice carrying faintly on the wind, a chilling, almost imperceptible whisper. The shipment arrives at midnight tomorrow. Team Alpha will secure the docks. Team Beta. I couldn't make out the rest, but it was enough. This was big. Some kind of organized crime, perhaps even an insidious act of terrorism. We needed to get out of there, to call the authorities, to expose this horror. But as I turned, carefully, to signal to the others to retreat, my elbow brushed against the shifting sand, dislodging a small, barely audible avalanche of fine grains. The noise wasn't loud, not truly, but in the suffocating, tense silence of the dunes, it might as well have been a gunshot. The figures below froze, their forms rigid, then, as one, they pivoted, turning their masked faces to look directly in our direction. "Run!" I hissed, scrambling backward, a choked gasp escaping my lips. We tumbled down the dune, a chaotic mess of limbs and sand, the fine grains filling our shoes and clinging to our clothes. I could hear shouts erupting behind us, then the unmistakable, chilling sound of pursuit, heavy, determined footsteps pounding on the sand, growing rapidly closer. Panic, raw and visceral, lent unnatural speed to our legs, and we sprinted, blindly, desperately, across the vast, open beach, towards the distant, mocking lights of town. But they were faster, more organized. As we reached the very edge of the beach, where the sand met the first ragged tufts of beach grass, dark, ominous figures materialized from the impenetrable night, cutting off our only escape route. We skidded to a halt, gasping for breath, our lungs burning, as the group from the dunes, their movements disturbingly synchronized, finally caught up. The tall man, their leader, stepped forward, his face still hidden in the deepest shadow of his hood. "Well, well," he said, his voice surprisingly smooth and controlled, laced with a chilling amusement. "What do we have here? Some nosy kids out past their bedtime?" I stepped instinctively in front of the others, trying, futilely, to shield them. "We didn't see anything," I said, hating the noticeable tremor in my voice. "We were just out for a walk. Please, let us go." The man chuckled, a sound devoid of any real humor, a cold, calculating sound. "I'm afraid it's not that simple. You've wandered into something much bigger than you can possibly imagine. Something that's been in motion for years." He gestured, a subtle flick of his wrist, and two of his men moved with chilling efficiency, seizing Finn, who let out a startled yelp of fear. Maya screamed, a guttural cry of despair, and I lunged forward, but strong, unyielding hands clamped down on me, holding me back. "Let him go," Chloe cried, hot tears streaming down her face, her voice raw with anguish. "He's just a kid." The leader ignored her, his masked gaze fixed solely, intensely, on me. "You have a choice to make, young man. A choice that will determine not just your fate, but the fate of your friends, and indeed, this entire town." My mind raced, frantically trying to make sense of the impossible situation, the grotesque absurdity of it all. What are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice strained. "Who are you people?" He slowly pulled back his hood, revealing a face I recognized with a jolt of sickening shock. It was Mayor Harrison, the man who had personally handed me my high school diploma just 2 months ago, a beacon of civic pride and trustworthiness. "We are the guardians of this town," he said, his voice taking on an almost reverent, chilling tone. "For generations, we have protected Seabrook from the outside world, ensuring our way of life continues undisturbed. What you witnessed tonight is just a small part of what we do to keep this community safe and prosperous." I shook my head, unable to process the words, unable to reconcile the image of the benign mayor with the masked figure before me. "Safe? You're talking about illegal shipments, about weapons. How is that keeping anyone safe?" Mayor Harrison, or whoever he truly was, smiled sadly, a melancholic, chilling expression. "The world is a complex place, Leo. Sometimes, to preserve something truly good, we must do things that might seem questionable to those who don't understand the bigger picture." He stepped closer, his eyes boring into mine with an unsettling intensity. You're a smart young man. I've watched you grow up. I think you have the potential to be a part of this. To help us protect everything you love. A profound chill ran through me as I finally understood the insidious nature of his offer. And if I refused? His expression hardened, becoming utterly devoid of warmth. Then, I'm afraid, we can't let you leave. Any of you. The safety of our operation, of our entire community, must be preserved at all costs. Time seemed to stretch, elastic and agonizing, as the immense weight of the decision crashed down on me, crushing me. On one side, the dark allure of power, the promise of being part of something vast and hidden, something bigger than myself. On the other, the suffocating knowledge that to accept would mean betraying every fiber of my being, everything I believed in, everything I thought I knew about right and wrong. I looked at my friends, at Maya's tear-streaked face, contorted with fear. At Ben's tightly clenched fists, vibrating with contained rage. At Chloe, clutching her terrified younger brother, Finn, protectively. I thought of our families, of the quiet, picturesque town we'd grown up in, now brutally revealed to be built upon generations of insidious lies and profound corruption. In that agonizing moment, I knew, with a certainty that transcended fear, that there was only one choice I could live with. No, I said, my voice, to my own surprise, stronger than I felt. Whatever you're involved in, whatever you think you're protecting, it's wrong. We won't be a part of it. And we won't stay silent. Mayor Harrison's face darkened, a storm cloud passing over his features. I'm disappointed, Leo. I had high hopes for you. He raised his hand, a subtle, almost imperceptible gesture, and I tensed, expecting the worst. But before he could give whatever chilling signal he intended, a new sound, a sound of salvation, sliced through the night. Police sirens, growing louder, more insistent, by the second. Boss. I thought we had the cops under control. One of the masked men hissed, panic edging his voice. Mayor Harrison's carefully constructed composure finally cracked for the first time. We do. He snarled, then his eyes, sharp and predatory, locked onto Finn, who was fumbling frantically with something in his pocket. The boy checked his phone. But it was too late. As the first police cars came into view, their flashing lights painting the beach in a surreal tableau of red and blue, I realized what had happened. Finn, in a moment of inspired, desperate quick thinking, had managed to dial 911 while we were all distracted, while our lives hung precariously in the balance. What followed was utter chaos. Mayor Harrison and his shadowy men scattered, dissolving into the dunes with a practiced speed that spoke of long, dark years of clandestine operations. We were left standing there, shell-shocked and trembling, as police officers swarmed the beach, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices sharp with command. The next few hours were a dizzying blur of questions, repeated statements, and a profound, bone-deep disbelief. We told our story over and over again, to increasingly higher-ranking officials. By dawn, the FBI had arrived, and our sleepy coastal town, Seabrook, was irrevocably transformed into the epicenter of a sprawling federal investigation. In the days and weeks that followed, the full, horrifying extent of the conspiracy was meticulously revealed. Mayor Harrison and his guardians had been running a sophisticated smuggling operation for decades, ruthlessly exploiting the town's isolated position to their advantage. The roots of corruption ran deep, implicating respected businessmen, local cops, even some of our high school teachers, a festering cancer at the heart of our community. As for us, the 5 unlikely witnesses, we were hailed as heroes by some, branded as traitors by others. The town itself was torn apart by the brutal, undeniable revelations, and nothing, absolutely nothing, would ever be the same. Our plans for college, once so vivid and immediate, were put on indefinite hold as we dealt with the overwhelming aftermath, the endless interviews, the exhausting depositions, the pervasive sense of betrayal. But through it all, through the chaos and the fear, we had each other. That night on the beach, that crucible of terror, had forged a bond between us that nothing, not even the shattering truth, could ever break. We had faced the darkness together, and though forever changed, we had emerged on the other side, unbroken. As I sit here now, years later, the echoes of that night still reverberating in the quiet corners of my mind, I often think back to that pivotal moment of choice on the beach. I wonder, sometimes, what would have happened if I had made a different decision, if I had been seduced by the insidious promise of power and secret knowledge. But then I look at my friends, at the lives we've painstakingly built in the wake of that night, lives rooted in honesty and resilience, and I know, with an unshakable certainty, that I made the right choice. We may have lost our youthful innocence, but we gained something far more valuable, the profound knowledge that even in the darkest, most corrupt of times, there are those who will stand up for what's right, no matter the devastating cost. The bonfire that was meant to mark the carefree end of our childhood became, instead, the searing crucible in which our true selves were forged. And though the flames have long since gone out, extinguished by the cold light of truth, the memory of that night continues to guide us, a stark reminder that sometimes the greatest adventures, and the greatest dangers, are found not in distant, exotic lands, but in the hidden, forgotten corners of the places we once innocently called home. Story 12. The bass pulsed through my body, a relentless rhythm that mirrored the frantic pounding of my heart. Neon lights flashed across a sea of writing, ecstatic bodies, but my eyes were fixed, drawn by an unsettling magnetism, on a small, isolated group of people at the very edge of the teeming crowd. They weren't dancing. They weren't smiling. And the unnerving way they scanned the festival grounds, their gazes sharp and predatory, made my skin crawl with an instinctive, primal unease. I'd come to Luminara Music Festival for 3 days of carefree fun, a much-needed escape from the mundane. Instead, I found myself inexplicably entangled in the nascent tendrils of a nightmare, one that would irrevocably alter everything I thought I knew about the vibrant world of music and festivals forever. My name is Kai, and I'm a die-hard music enthusiast. I'd been counting down the days to Luminara for months, meticulously saving every penny from my barista job to afford the exorbitant tickets. My best friends, Zara and Noah, were just as excited. We arrived on Friday afternoon, pitching our tent in the sprawling, chaotic campground and immediately joining the throngs of jubilant festival-goers streaming towards the main stage. The first day was everything we'd hoped for and more. We danced until our feet ached with blissful exhaustion, sang along to our favorite bands until our voices were hoarse and cracking, and reveled in the electric, communal atmosphere that only a truly massive music festival can create. As night fell, plunging the grounds into a kaleidoscope of artificial light, and the headliners finally took the stage, I felt that familiar, exhilarating rush of euphoria, of being part of something immense and profoundly bigger than myself. It was during a set change on Saturday afternoon that I first noticed them. A group of about 10 people, dressed in dark, almost utilitarian clothing that stood out starkly among the vibrant, bright sea of colorful festival wear. They moved with a disturbing sense of purpose, weaving through the dense crowd with an intensity that seemed profoundly at odds with the laid-back, almost languid vibe of the festival. "Check out the Narc Squad," Noah joked, nodding towards them, a wry grin on his face. "Guess someone's not here for the music." I laughed it off, a nervous, brittle sound, but something about the group continued to nag at me, a persistent, unsettling itch at the back of my mind. They didn't look like any security or police I'd ever encountered at a festival, and the way they communicated, quick, almost imperceptible hand signals, hushed conversations into concealed earpieces, spoke of a level of covert organization that went far beyond simple crowd control. As the day wore on, I kept spotting members of the group in different, seemingly unconnected areas of the festival grounds. They seemed to be everywhere, by the bustling food vendors, near the exclusive VIP areas, even lurking backstage from what I could discern. And always watching. Always on high alert. "You're being paranoid," Zara told me with a dismissive wave of her hand when I pointed them out again, her brow furrowed with concern for my escalating anxiety. "It's probably just extra security because of what happened at Glastonbury last year." But I simply couldn't shake the visceral feeling that something was deeply, profoundly off. Perhaps it was the unnerving way they occasionally approached certain unsuspecting festival goers, leading them away for brief, intense conversations. Or how they seemed to be particularly interested in the area around the medical tents, lingering there with an unnatural attention. By Sunday morning, my escalating curiosity had utterly consumed me, overriding any lingering sense of caution. While Zara and Noah slept off the excesses of the previous night's revelry, I decided to do some investigating of my own. I grabbed my camera, figuring I could use the convenient excuse of taking festival photos if anyone dared to question my movements. I started by discreetly following one of the group members I'd recognized from the day before. He led me on a winding, circuitous path through the sprawling campgrounds, stopping occasionally to speak in low tones into his earpiece. Finally, he ducked behind a row of grimy porta-potties, disappearing from my view. Heart racing, a frantic drum in my chest, I crept closer, camera at the ready. As I peered cautiously around the corner, I saw something that made my blood run instantly cold. The man was kneeling beside an unmarked, nondescript white van, its back doors now ajar, revealing a high-tech interior crammed with monitors and sophisticated communication equipment. But it was what he was carefully loading into the van that truly horrified me, a large, clear container filled with what looked like hundreds of small, eerily glowing capsules. I raised my camera on instinct, my hands trembling, the shutter clicking before my brain could even process the wisdom of the action. The sound, barely audible over the distant, thumping music, was still enough to alert the man. His head snapped up, eyes locking onto mine with a look of cold, unadulterated fury. I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, weaving frantically through a labyrinth of tents and dodging confused, startled campers. I could hear heavy footsteps thudding behind me, gaining ground with terrifying speed, closing in with every desperate second. Panic, a thick, suffocating fog, clouded my thoughts as I realized, with a sickening lurch, that I had absolutely no idea where I was going. The sprawling festival grounds, once a place of joy, had transformed into a bewildering maze, and I was the terrified rat being mercilessly hunted. Just when I thought my lungs would burst, When my legs were screaming in agony, a hand, surprisingly gentle but firm, grabbed my arm, yanking me sideways with surprising force. I opened my mouth, a desperate scream already forming, but another hand clamped over it, muffling the sound effectively. I found myself pressed against the cool, corrugated side of a food truck, hidden from view by a precarious stack of empty cardboard boxes. "Quiet," a voice hissed urgently in my ear. "They'll hear you." I turned to see a girl, about my age, her colorful festival wristbands marking her as another attendee. She held a finger to her lips, then pointed. I followed her gaze to see two of the dark-clothed figures, their faces grim, run past our hiding spot, clearly searching for me with a relentless purpose. When they were gone, their footsteps fading into the distance, the girl finally released me. "Are you okay?" she asked, her eyes scanning me quickly for injuries. I nodded, still trying desperately to catch my breath, my chest heaving. "Who are you? What's going on?" She introduced herself as Lena. "I'm with a group called Festival Watch," she explained, her voice low and urgent. "We've been tracking these guys for months. They show up at festivals all over the country, always with the same MO. What are they doing?" I asked, the image of the glowing capsule still burned into my mind. Lena's face darkened, a grim shadow passing over it. "They're using the festivals as cover for a massive drug operation. But not just any drugs. The stuff they're peddling. It's not from this world, Kai." I startled at the casual use of my name, but Lena waved off my unspoken surprise. "And we've been watching you too, ever since you started noticing them. We needed to be sure you weren't one of them." My head was spinning, a dizzying whirlwind of impossible information. "Not from this world? What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it sounds like," Lena said grimly. "Those capsules you saw? They contain a substance that originated elsewhere. Something that can alter human consciousness in ways we're only beginning to understand." She went on to explain that the group, which chillingly called itself the Lumina Collective, had been using music festivals as distribution points for years. The inherent chaos and already altered states of consciousness present at these massive events made them the perfect cover for insidiously introducing an otherworldly substance into the unsuspecting population. "But why?" I asked, a new, deeper dread forming in my gut. "What's their endgame?" Lena shook her head, her expression grim. "We're not sure. But based on what we've seen, we think they're preparing for something big. Some kind of mass event that requires a significant portion of the population to be changed." The implications were staggering, horrifying. I thought of all the carefree people I'd seen at the festival, dancing and laughing without a single care in the world. How many of them had unknowingly ingested this alien substance? How many were even now being subtly altered in ways they couldn't possibly comprehend? "We need your help, Kai," Lena said, her voice urgent, a desperate plea. "You've got an in that we don't. Your camera. We need evidence. Something concrete we can take to the authorities." I hesitated. A primal part of me screamed to run, to grab Zara and Noah and get as far away from this insanity as humanly possible. But a larger, more resolute part, a burgeoning sense of responsibility, knew I couldn't walk away. Not now that I knew what was truly at stake. "What do you need me to do?" I asked, the words a resigned exhale. The next few hours were a blur of covert movements and heart-stopping, agonizingly close calls. Lena and I worked our way silently through the festival, meticulously documenting the Lumina Collective's activities as best we could without being detected. We saw them make discreet drops at designated points, watched as unsuspecting festival goers were approached and given free samples of a new party drug. But it was what we discovered in the medical tent that truly, viscerally, drove home the unspeakable horror of the situation. Under the guise of treating routine dehydration and heat stroke, Lumina Collective operatives were systematically administering the alien substance to incapacitated, vulnerable patients. I managed to get several clear, damning photos of the process, my hands shaking violently as I finally comprehended the terrifying scale of what we were up against. As the festival's final night reached its thundering, ecstatic peak, Lena and I made our way to the rendezvous point she'd arranged with her festival watch colleagues. We were so agonizingly close to getting out, to blowing this whole terrifying thing wide open. But the Lumina Collective had other, far more sinister plans. We were less than 50 yards from what we thought was safety when the first deafening explosion rocked the grounds. Screams, raw and primal, filled the air as widespread panic erupted and spread like wildfire through the bewildered crowd. In the ensuing chaos, the suffocating, swirling smoke, I tragically lost sight of Lena. I searched desperately, calling her name, but it was futile. The vast sea of terrified, stampeding people swept me along, inexorably, away from the exits and deeper into the chaotic heart of the festival. As thick, acrid smoke filled the air and more explosions sounded ominously in the distance, I realized with a horrifying, gut-wrenching certainty that this was it, the mass event Lena had warned about. The Lumina Collective was making its final, horrifying move, ruthlessly using the manufactured panic and confusion to blanket the entire festival grounds in their insidious, alien substance. I fought my way desperately through the surging crowd, my camera clutched tightly to my chest, a fragile beacon of truth. I had to get out. Had to get this damning evidence to someone who could help. But as I neared the perimeter, the supposed boundary of safety, I saw them, Lumina Collective operatives, now forming an impenetrable barrier, ruthlessly preventing anyone from leaving. In that moment, as the world descended into utter chaos around me, I understood that the Luminara Music Festival had been just the terrifying beginning. Whatever the Lumina Collective had planned, it was infinitely bigger than this one event, bigger than anything we could have ever imagined. I looked down at my camera, at the irrefutable evidence it contained, and made a desperate, defiant decision. I might not be able to stop what was happening here, not fully, but I could, by God, make sure the world knew the truth. With shaking hands, I found a precarious hiding spot, tucked away amidst the rubble and the fleeing crowds, and began frantically uploading the photos to every social media platform I could possibly access, a desperate cry into the digital void. As I hit send on the final upload, a heavy hand clamped down on my shoulder. I turned to see one of the Lumina Collective operatives, his eyes cold and devoid of emotion behind his dark glasses. "I'm afraid you'll have to come with us," he said, his voice utterly flat, devoid of menace, yet chilling in its calm finality. As he led me away, I caught a final, haunting glimpse of the main stage. The headlining act was still playing, their music a relentless, driving beat, seemingly oblivious or profoundly indifferent to the surrounding chaos. Their music, once a source of boundless joy, now felt like a chilling funeral dirge for the world as we knew it. The Luminara Music Festival had become ground zero for an invasion none of us saw coming. And as I was marched towards an uncertain, terrifying fate, I couldn't help but wonder how many other festivals, how many other unsuspecting crowds, were even now falling under the Lumina Collective's insidious influence. The music played on, relentless and haunting, but the song remained the same, a terrifying, mournful melody of a world on the very brink of an unimaginable, horrifying change. Story 13. The binoculars felt unnaturally heavy in my hands as I watched the group of bird watchers trudge through the protected meadow, their heavy boots crushing delicate wildflowers with each careless step. Something about their movements, their furtive glances, set my teeth on edge. In my 10 years as a park ranger at Sequoia National Park, I'd seen my fair share of overzealous nature enthusiasts, but this was different. These people weren't here for the birds. I'm Ranger Ben Carter, and what started as a routine patrol would soon plunge me into a nightmare that would shake my faith in humanity and challenge everything I thought I knew about the wilderness I'd sworn to protect. The day had dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn morning that reminded me why I'd chosen this life, away from the chaos of the city. I'd set out at first light, my pack filled with supplies for a day of trail maintenance and wildlife observation. The ancient sequoias, some older than civilization itself, stood sentinel as I made my way through the familiar paths. It was mid-morning when I first spotted the group, 6 of them, decked out in expensive outdoor gear, carrying an assortment of cameras and what looked suspiciously like scientific equipment. Nothing unusual there. We often had researchers and serious bird watchers in the park. But as I observed them from a distance, little details began to nag at me. Their bird watching seemed haphazard at best. They'd stop randomly, huddle together in intense, whispered discussion, then move on with a sense of purpose that had absolutely nothing to do with following avian calls. And the way they scanned the tree line, it was almost as if they were looking for something specific, something that definitely wasn't a rare feathered specimen. Curiosity piqued, I decided to approach them. As I drew closer, their conversation became audible, and what I heard made me pause mid-step. "It has to be here somewhere," a tall man with wild, graying hair was saying. The ancient texts were clear. "The nexus point is within this forest, but we've been searching for days." A younger woman replied, frustration evident in her voice. What if the texts were wrong? What if she cut herself off abruptly as they noticed my approach? In an instant, their demeanor changed. Forced smiles appeared, and the tall man stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Ah, Ranger. Lovely morning, isn't it? We were just discussing the fascinating migratory patterns of the Stellar's jay. Have you seen any around lately?" The lie was smooth, practiced. I played along, making small talk about local wildlife while my mind raced. What were they really looking for? What ancient texts had led them here? As we chatted, I noticed other oddities. Their backpacks seemed unusually heavy for a day trip, and I caught glimpses of strange symbols etched onto their equipment. One woman kept fingering a pendant around her neck, a design I'd never seen before, all sharp angles and unsettling swirls that hurt my eyes if I looked at it too long. I left them with a polite warning about staying on designated trails and protecting the delicate ecosystem, but as I walked away, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something was very wrong here. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on the group. They would venture out at dawn, returning exhausted at dusk, only to pore over maps and ancient-looking books late into the night. I overheard fragments of conversations that made no sense, talk of ley lines, cosmic convergences, and something they chillingly referred to as the awakening. Other rangers noticed nothing amiss, laughing off my concerns, just some new age types communing with nature, they'd say. But I couldn't shake the visceral feeling that these people posed a threat, not just to the park, but to something far, far bigger. On the fourth night, unable to ignore the mounting dread, I decided to follow them. I told myself it was simply to ensure they weren't damaging protected areas, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. I needed to know what they were really up to. I trailed them silently through the darkness, grateful for my years of experience navigating these treacherous woods. They moved with purpose now, no longer bothering with the flimsy pretense of bird watching. After an hour of hiking, they reached a small, secluded clearing I'd never seen before. What happened next would haunt my dreams for years to come. The group formed a tight circle in the center of the clearing. The tall man, clearly their leader, began to chant in a language I'd never heard before, guttural and resonant. The others joined in, their voices rising in an eerie, unsettling harmony that seemed to make the very air vibrate. Suddenly, the ground at the center of their circle began to glow. A pale, sickly light seeped up from the earth, forming pulsing tendrils that wrapped around the chanters' legs. They showed no fear. If anything, their voices grew more fervent, more consumed. I wanted to run, to radio for backup, to do anything but stand there watching, paralyzed. But I was rooted to the spot, my body refusing to obey my panicked mind. The chanting reached a fever pitch, a crescendo of unearthly sound, and the light erupted into a blinding pillar that shot violently into the night sky. For a terrifying moment, I could have sworn I saw something within that incandescent light, grotesque shapes that defied the very laws of physics, eyes that belonged to no earthly creature. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The light vanished, plunging the clearing into an oppressive, absolute darkness. The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum where the bizarre spectacle had been. As my eyes slowly readjusted to the gloom, I saw the group sprawled motionless on the ground, apparently unconscious. I should have gone to check on them, to call for medical help. Instead, I ran. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every desperate stride. I didn't stop until I reached my isolated cabin, where I collapsed, gasping for breath, my mind reeling from the impossible, terrifying spectacle I'd witnessed. The next morning, I half convinced myself it had all been a vivid nightmare. But when I forced myself to check the clearing, I found irrefutable evidence I couldn't ignore. The grass in a perfect circle was withered and black, as if seared by some intense, unnatural heat. And at the precise center, half buried in the scorched earth, was a small object that made my blood run cold, a crudely carved figurine of some creature that could not possibly exist in our world. I knew I had to report what I'd seen, but who would believe me? How could I explain the inexplicable without sounding utterly insane, as if I'd lost my mind to the wilderness? As I stood there, wrestling with my impossible decision, I heard a twig snap behind me. I whirled around to find the group's leader standing at the very edge of the clearing, watching me with eyes that suddenly seemed too old, too knowing for any human face. "You saw, didn't you, Ranger?" he said, his voice carrying an unnerving undertone I couldn't quite place. "You witnessed the beginning." "The beginning of what?" I managed to ask, my mouth dry as dust. His smile was both beatific and terrifying, utterly devoid of human warmth. "The awakening, of course." This world has slumbered for too long, ignorant of the greater realities that surround it. We are simply opening its eyes. I wanted to argue, to scream that he was insane, but the searing memory of that otherworldly light, of the grotesque shapes I'd glimpsed within it, stopped the words dead in my throat. You have a choice to make, Ranger, he continued, taking a slow, deliberate step closer. You can try to stop us, futile as that would be, or you can join us. Help us usher in a new age of enlightenment. In that chilling moment, I realized the true, terrifying horror of the situation. It wasn't just about protecting the park anymore. These people, this awakening they spoke of, it threatened everything. The world as we knew it was in profound, existential danger, and I, a humble park ranger, was possibly the only one who truly knew. I'll give you time to consider, the man said, turning to leave, melting back into the shadows of the forest. But not too much time. Events have been set in motion that cannot be undone. The choice is yours, evolve with us, or be left behind in a world that will soon cease to exist as you know it. As he disappeared, I stood there, the crushing weight of his words pressing down on me. I was just a park ranger, used to dealing with lost hikers and the occasional problem bear. How could I possibly hope to stop whatever cosmic madness these people had unleashed? But as I looked around at the ancient, silent forest, at the majestic mountains that had stood watch for millennia, a fierce resolve hardened within me. I knew I had to try. This land, this world, was under my protection, and I would defend it, no matter the insurmountable cost. I pulled out my radio, hesitating for just a moment before making the call that would irrevocably change everything. Base, this is Ranger Carter. We have a situation. I need to speak with the park superintendent, and possibly federal authorities. It's about a threat to national security. As I waited for a response, my eyes were drawn back to the scorched circle. For a fleeting moment, I could have sworn I saw that sickly blue light flickering just beneath the surface of the earth, pulsing faintly like a grotesque heartbeat. The forest suddenly felt alien, hostile. The awakening had truly begun, and I was the only one who knew, the only one who could possibly stand against it. God help us all. Story 14. The scream of the ambulance siren faded into the howling wind as I navigated the icy roads, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The address glowing on my GPS was unfamiliar, a lonely dot on the outskirts of town. As the snow swirled in my headlights, obscuring the world beyond, a chill ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the sub-zero temperature. Something about this call felt different. I'm Jake Holloway, paramedic for Millbrook Emergency Services. 10 years on the job and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me on that frigid winter night. The storm had been raging for hours, turning our small town into a ghostly landscape of white. Most people were hunkered down at home, waiting out the blizzard, but duty called. And when the emergency alert came through about a possible heart attack at a remote address, my partner Charlie and I loaded up the ambulance and headed out into the maelstrom. As we left the familiar streets behind, the world seemed to close in around us. The headlights barely penetrated the wall of white, and the wind buffeted the ambulance, threatening to push us off the narrow road. Charlie, usually a chatterbox, had fallen silent, his eyes fixed on the GPS as if willing it to guide us safely to our destination. And this can't be right, I muttered as we turned onto what was little more than a dirt track now buried under inches of snow. Who lives all the way out here? Charlie shrugged, his face pale in the glow of the dashboard lights. Dispatcher said it was an old man, probably some hermit who likes his privacy. I nodded, but the uneasy feeling in my gut only intensified. We were miles from the nearest neighbor, from any help if things went south. But there was no turning back now. Someone needed us, and it was our job to be there. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, a structure loomed out of the darkness. It was a house, if you could call it that, more like a ramshackle cabin that looked like it might collapse under the weight of the snow on its roof. A single light flickered in a downstairs window, the only sign of life in this desolate place. I parked as close to the front door as I dared, not wanting to get stuck in the deep snow. As we grabbed our gear and stepped out into the howling wind, the cold hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath away. The snow was nearly up to my knees, and each step was a struggle. As we made our way to the porch, the wood creaked ominously under our weight. As I raised my hand to knock, before my knuckles could make contact, the door swung open with a groan that seemed to echo in the stillness. An old man stood there, hunched and frail, looking, his rheumy eyes peering up at him from a face etched with deep lines. "Took you long enough," he grumbled, his voice barely audible over the wind. Come in. He's upstairs." Charlie and I exchanged a glance. "Sir," I said, raising my voice to be heard, "we received a call about a possible heart attack. Are you all right?" The old man waved a gnarled hand dismissively. "Not me, you fool, my brother. He's the one who needs help. Hurry up now, he doesn't have much time." Alarm bells were ringing in my head, but I pushed them aside. We had a job to do. I nodded to Charlie, and we followed the old man into the house, dragging our equipment behind us. The interior was dimly lit and cluttered, every surface covered with stacks of newspapers, old books and items I couldn't identify in the gloom. The air was thick with the musty smell of neglect and something else, something metallic and unsettling. "Up here," the old man called, already halfway up a narrow staircase. We followed, our boots leaving wet prints on the worn steps. The upper floor was even darker than the first, the only light coming from a single bare bulb swinging gently from the ceiling. The old man led us to a closed door at the end of the hallway. "In there," he said, gesturing with a trembling hand. "Please help him." I reached for the doorknob, but Charlie's hand on my arm stopped me. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Jake," he whispered, "something's not right here. We should call for backup." I hesitated. Charlie was right. Every instinct was screaming at me to turn around, to get out of this house and never look back. But I could hear labored breathing coming from behind the door. Someone was in there, someone who might need our help. "We can't leave," I said firmly, "not if there's a chance we can save a life." Before Charlie could protest further, I turned the knob and pushed the door open. The smell hit me first, a coppery tang that made my stomach lurch. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I fumbled for my flashlight. The beam illuminated a scene that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. The walls were covered in photographs, hundreds, maybe thousands of them, overlapping and haphazard pinned up. But these weren't family snapshots or vacation memories. These were images of death, crime scene photos, autopsy shots, pictures of accidents and murders and things too gruesome to comprehend. In the center of the room, on a bed that looked like it hadn't been changed in years, lay a figure. For a moment I thought it was another corpse captured in one of those terrible photographs. But then I saw the chest rise and fall with shallow breaths. "Oh God," Charlie whispered behind me. I heard the thud of our medical bags hitting the floor, followed by the sound of retching. I forced myself to move closer to the bed, my training kicking in despite the horror surrounding me. The man on the bed was ancient, his skin like parchment stretched over bone. His eyes were open, staring blankly at the ceiling. "Sir," I said, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears, "can you hear me? We're here to help." There was no response, no indication that he was aware of our presence. I reached for his wrist, feeling for a pulse. It was there but weak and three. "Charlie," I called, trying to keep my voice steady, "I need you to pull it together. We have a patient here." But Charlie wasn't listening. He was staring at the walls, his face a mask of terror. "Jake," he said, his voice cracking, "look at the dates on these photos." I glanced at the nearest image, a gruesome shot of a car accident. The date stamp in the corner made my blood run cold. It was tomorrow's date. As the implications of what I was seeing sank in, a low chuckle came from the doorway. The old man who had let us in was standing there, a smile on his face that sent shivers down my spine. "You boys sure took your time getting here," he said, his voice suddenly stronger, more menacing, "but that's all right. You're right on schedule." I opened my mouth to speak, to demand answers, but no words came out. The room seemed to spin around me as I realized the terrible truth: we weren't here to save anyone. We were here to become part of this macabre collection. The old man's smile widened, revealing teeth that were unnaturally sharp. "Don't worry," he said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind him, "your pictures will look lovely on the wall." What happened next is a blur in my memory. There was a struggle, desperate and frantic. I remember the flash of a blade, Charlie's scream cut short, the taste of blood in my mouth. Somehow, through sheer adrenaline and blind luck, I managed to fight my way past the old man and down the stairs. I burst out of the house into the raging storm, not daring to look back. The wind tore at me as I stumbled through the deep snow, my only thought to get as far away from that house of horrors as possible. I don't know how long I ran, or how I managed to find my way back to civilization. The next clear memory I have is of sitting in the back of a police cruiser, a blanket around my shoulders, trying to explain to skeptical officers what I had seen. They found the house eventually, but it was empty. No old men, no room full of photographs, no sign of Charlie. Just an abandoned cabin slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The official report chalked it up to hallucinations brought on by stress and the extreme weather conditions. Charlie was listed as missing, presumed dead in the blizzard. But I know what I saw. I know what was in that room. Sometimes late at night, when the wind howls outside my window, I think I can hear Charlie's voice calling for help. And I wonder, with a dread that chills me to my core, if somewhere out there, in a room full of death, there's a photograph of me with tomorrow's date. I don't work as a paramedic anymore. I can't bring myself to answer those late-night calls, to drive down dark and lonely roads. But I keep a scanner in my room, always listening. And every time I hear about a call to a remote address and every time the storm winds pick up, I say a silent prayer for those brave souls heading out into the night. Because I know what's waiting for them in the darkness. And I know that sometimes the real monsters aren't the ones in the stories, they're the ones waiting behind closed doors with smiles like knives and rooms full of stolen souls.